Good evening. In compliance with Governor Cuomo's executive order pursuant to public meetings during the COVID-19 outbreak, tonight's Arundecoit Zoning Board meeting is being conducted using Zoom. And at this point, I'd like to call the meeting to order and ask everyone to rise and join me in the Pledge to Allegiance, or Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America,
and to the
to the
republic
republic
which it
which it
stands,
stands,
one
one
nation,
nation,
under
under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So I'd like to welcome everyone to the May and first virtual meeting of the Arundecoit Zoning Board of Appeals. Our meeting is available for live viewing on Facebook, live listening via the phone, in information provided on the town's website, and it will also be rebroadcast on ICAT Government Access, which is Spectrum Channel 1303. Tonight, for each case subject to a public hearing, we will follow a similar order of operations as we normally do. Except tonight, we're going to use remote access options. Applicants will be invited to join the meeting via Zoom or by phone when their case is called. Once the public hearing is opened, public input on each case can be received either by mail or phone. Since it's going to be difficult to sort out whether that's what category that input might fall into, we'll just take it as it comes, rather than doing it those in favor, those opposed, and those who just want to talk to us as we usually do. Similar to a regular meeting, each person who's providing public comment will need to give their full name and address, and they'll be given up to 5 minutes to provide their comments to the board. Once your comments have been received, we'll move on to the next email or call if any are waiting. We're asking anyone sending in comments during the public hearing to put the address or case number in the subject line of the email. During the public hearing for each case, staff will monitor the zoningboard@arundecoit.org email site. The emails will be read into the record by staff. Please be sure to provide your name and address for the record. The public can call in using the information provided on the website and displayed at the bottom of the screen on Facebook. While the public is listening to the meeting on the phone, they can provide comment on the current case by virtually raising their hand by pressing 9 on their phone. If you call in to make a comment on a public hearing case, you will receive a prompt on the phone that you've been unmuted. That is your cue to speak to the board. When we call the case, as we do normally, we will first hear from the applicant. The applicant will state their name, address, they'll pause, they will raise their right hands, be sworn, and then they can proceed with the presentation of their case. When the applicant has completed the presentation of the case, which is after any questions or comments from the board have all been resolved, then we'll open that portion up to the public input as I just described. On behalf of the board, I'd like to thank you for your participation and patience as we navigate our first remote public hearing. So if we can have the first case called.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First item on the agenda this evening is case number ZB 2020-05-1. Upon the matter of request by Nancy Barrett for an area variance to replace existing fencing on a vacant lot with less than required setback on premises tax ID 077.35-1-51, abutting 158 Schnackle Drive in an R3 residential district.
Okay, is Ms. Barrett present?
Hold on for 1 second. I'm going to be looking for the attendees. Hold on one moment.
Okay. I see we have double counsel tonight. Welcome, gentlemen.
This is a transition duo.
Yep.
Chairman, I did activate Ms. Barrett, so she should be able to speak right now.
Okay, Ms. Barrett.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, if you could state your name and address and then pause a moment so I can swear you in.
Okay. My name is Nancy Barrett, 158 Schnackle Drive, Rochester, New York, 14622.
All right, so I can't see you, but I'll assume that you're raising your right hand
Why can't you see me?
because I
That's
just
just
see
a function, that's just a function of how we've set up the webinar for the
Okay.
meeting. So only the members of the board and staff are visible on video. Everyone else is just, their name appears in a box on the
Okay,
screen.
So I'll assume that you have your right hand raised. Do you swear or affirm that everything you say tonight will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
yes, I do.
Okay, if you would proceed to explain what you're looking for from the board, that would be helpful.
The fence that is currently on the property needs repair. I was cited last fall because it wasn't in good shape. My neighbor took down a solid wood fence adjacent to it, and I was never able to get at it to fix it with that wood fence up against it. So now I need to fix it. I want to replace a section that has been buried down in the ground partially and tipped over. And that portion, there's a portion that's missing again now, and it extends to the edge of the water to my break wall. And I want to repair the part that needs repairing and make sure it's up to the break wall. I have a little dog. I don't want her going in and out at the neighbors. It's very difficult.
Okay. Is there anything else you wish to add? You don't have to. I just,
No, that's basically it. It's to keep the animals from going back and forth. We have a lot of wildlife here. We have all kinds of, we have raccoons, and of course we have mink and so forth. And my little dog loves to sniff them all out and keep right on going. So I really would like to repair that fence.
all right, do any members of the board have any questions for Ms. Barrett? I don't see anyone indicating that they do, so we'll open it up to the public input at this portion. At this time, is there anyone who wishes to speak concerning this application?
So if anybody, for the folks who are currently attending the meeting, if you can either on the phone call press *9, and that is you effectively raising your hand expressing interest to speak during the public hearing portion, or if you're signed in through a link and you're logged in as yourself through Zoom, there should be a menu item that is requesting a chance to speak. So Chairman, I'm just letting you know that I will wait another moment or so, but I'm not seeing anybody raising their hand.
Okay.
And at the risk of sounding like an auctioneer, I don't know if we want to do going once, going twice, or speak now or forever hold your peace. I don't see anybody. I continue to see no one raising their hand to speak to the public hearing.
All right, I think any or all of them work just fine.
The written communication for this application?
Is there any?
No, I did not receive any written communication.
All right, so we will close the hearing with respect to Ms. Barrett's application. Ms. Barrett, thank you. I'm not sure how we're handling the deliberation phrase since no one is present, actually. We'll probably just deliberate in the order that they are, but I don't, you don't have to stay on while we complete the rest of the agenda. If you want, you can call into the office tomorrow, and someone will let you know what we decide.
Do I just call the main office at the town? Where do I call?
I'll
Ooh.
defer to Carrie or Michelle on that one.
You can call Nancy, you can call me. This is Michelle. You can call me at the 336-6017.
336.
6017.
Okay.
Okay.
Michelle.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Thank
And
you.
just, you know, the meeting is being broadcast on Facebook Live. It's also being broadcast on iCat Live. We were able to make that happen for this meeting as well. So if you tune into either one of those, you'll be able to see the deliberation as well.
I don't do Facebook, but I don't do those, so I don't know. But I can stay on and listen to it.
Mhm.
You can.
Sure.
Thank you.
All right, then we'll close the hearing with respect to Schnackle Drive and move on to the next case on the agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Next item on the agenda is case number ZB 2020-05-2. Upon the matter of request by Scott Comfort for an area variance to install a 6-foot-high side yard fence exceeding maximum permitted height on premises 16 Birch Lane in an R1 residential district.
So, Chairman, I'm going to let you know that Scott Comfort, who is the applicant, is on the call and has been added to the Zoom, and I've gone ahead and allowed or unmuted his line. So Scott,
I see him there. Well, I don't see him, but I see his name and the looks like a Lego character. So, Mr. Comfort, you're there?
Yes, I am.
All right, if you could state your name and your address and then pause so I can swear you in, and then we'll get to your case.
Scott Comfort, 16 Birch Lane, Rochester, New York, 14622.
Okay, Mr. Comfort, I can't actually see you, but I will assume that you've raised your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that everything you say tonight will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay. And just for the record, I would indicate that we received a email communication from your neighbor, Robert and Jean Wells at 25 Birch Lane, indicating that they have no problem with the fence as it is. Although if my memory serves me correctly, they're the neighbors to the west, and the fence that you're talking about would be behind the house to the east, so they wouldn't see it in any event. Is that right?
That's correct.
Well, they don't have a problem with it, so we're good to go that way, I guess. All right, so you want to finish the fence that you've put on the east side of your house, is that correct?
Correct.
And as I looked at it, it appeared to me that you wanted to run it from the property line to the east to the house at the point where the main part of the house ends and it looks like an addition begins. Is that right?
Yes.
And because you're on a corner lot, the side of the house that you view as your front is actually the side, and
Correct.
what you would view as the side is the front.
Correct.
So if your house would just consisted of the main part, you wouldn't need the variance, as I understand it. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. So that's what we're dealing with.
Yeah.
Does anyone on the board have any questions or comments? Anyone want to say anything at all? Everyone seems to be silent. Nobody's muted though, I don't think, right?
So, Chairman, if you want to ask folks to sort of unmute themselves, just to, verbally say yes or no, or I'm all set, certainly we can do that. So the viewing public at home or on TV knows that we're all alive and well and just haven't put a screenshot of ourselves up for the broadcast.
All right, then I'll just go down the roll. Mr. Hart, do you have any questions or comments?
No questions at this time. Thank you.
Mr. Intini,
No questions at this time.
Mr. Scott.
One quick question. Is the fence already exist? Is it already in existence? The email correspondence we received led me to believe that it already exists, the 6-foot fence, or is that not the case?
So we just moved in last month. We got a permit to get a 6-foot fence minus the 3 sections where we needed the 4-foot or the variance to go to 6 foot. So the part we could put up a 6-foot fence, which technically is the backyard and part of the side yard because we're on a corner, we put that up, and then the section we need a variance for, there's just posts and metal fencing because we have 2 dogs that we're trying to keep in the yard. So we didn't, it's not finished until we got the variance or didn't get the variance, and then we'll finish it accordingly.
Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Nothing else at this time.
Okay, Mr. Travis.
I'm all set, Jim. Thank you.
And Mr. Upson.
I'm fine.
All right, and Ms. Bickett. I apologize for calling you last when you're first, but on the alphabetical sheet that I have, we're not quite alphabetical yet.
Take no offense, and I have no questions at this time.
Okay, all right, then we will open it up to public input for anyone who wishes to comment on the application for 16 Birch Lane.
So I'll just repeat again for anybody who's listening in as an attendee. If you're listening in by phone, you can press *9, and that will effectively raise your hand, and I'll be able to see that. If you are attending through a link, and you can just, there should be on a pull-down menu, you can indicate that you'd like a turn to speak. And we'll just hold for a quick minute. And then while we're waiting, I'll also just double check and confirm that I'm checking the zoning board at arundequoit.org during each of the cases as they're called. And I'm refreshing the email, and there have been no new emails received during the meeting, just to clarify.
Hey,
Okay.
Carrie, real quick, in the email that you sent out, though, it did say planning at arundequoit.org or planning board at arundequoit.org. Did that email go out to everyone else?
No, that was just to, that was the mistake, mistake to internally.
Okay.
The notice
Okay,
that
great.
went out, the notice that went out by Nate Stone, who serves as our IT and all things ICAT and broadcasts of these, would never make that rookie mistake. So that information was correct when it went out to the public.
Thanks, Carrie.
So do we have anyone who wishes to speak with respect
We still do not. So it looks like there are no speakers except for
All
the
right.
one written communication that was received on this application.
which is the one I already read, correct?
That is correct.
All right, then seeing that there's no public input, we will close the hearing with respect to the 16 Birch Lane application. And that then takes us, if I understand our agenda correctly, into 2 cases which are different from what we normally hear, in that these cases are appeals to the Zoning Board of Appeals from decisions that were made by the town administration in response to a complaint. And the complainants in each of those cases have appealed the decision to our board. My understanding is that when we sit as an appeal board from a decision of the administration, that we apply a different standard of review than what we normally apply to an area variance or a use variance. And namely, our role is to determine whether or not there was an abuse of discretion or whether the decision that's being appealed lacks a substantial basis in the record, and or whether it's an arbitrary or capricious decision. And since we have 2 counsel standing by, they can correct me if I'm wrong about that.
So Mr. Chairman, it's Rob Brenner. Nice to see you again.
Likewise.
The standard for these interpretations is actually a little bit different, and Nate's prepared a summary of the standard that he's prepared to share with the board. In
Okay.
essence, your charge is to determine whether or not the zoning board would have reached the same determination as the director of development did. So Nate's got a bit more, as I mentioned, on the specific standard, but it's essentially, do you believe that the decision was correct, not whether or not it was arbitrary or capricious, and would the board have reached the same determination?
Okay. All right. Thank you for that clarification.
Yep. And Nate, I'll leave it to you to summarize.
Yeah, that's correct. Just taking right directly from the town law, section 267 B1, the Board of Appeals may reverse or affirm wholly or partly, or may modify the order, requirement, decision, interpretation, or as in this case, determination appealed from, and shall make such order, requirement, decision, interpretation, or determination as in its opinion ought to have been made in the matter by the administrative official charged with the enforcement of such ordinance or local law, and to that end shall have all the powers of the administrative official from whose order, requirement, decision, interpretation, or determination appeal is taken. So in layman's terms, there's no need to make a decision, and nor is it appropriate whether the determination made here was rational or reasonable or arbitrary or capricious, such as those terms are often used in these reviews, but rather, in the board's opinion, would you have reached the same decision as was made here by the administrative official?
Okay, thanks for that clarification. All right, so then, does anyone on members of the board have any questions or comments for Mr. Vanderwall or Mr. Brenner with respect to what the criteria are that we're applying to these cases? Speak now or hold your peace until later. No one's speaking. Okay, so I guess we can call that the first appeal.
Excuse me, case number ZB 2020-05-3. Upon the matter of request by Peter Weisenhar, acting as agent for Wade and Gina Weaver, to appeal the Director of Development's interpretation regarding code enforcement compliancy at 258 St. Joseph Street in an RR rural residential district.
So I just added Peter to the call, so you'll see his name pop up. I do see Gina Weaver logged in, and so Peter, let me know if you want me to make Gina's mic active as well. I'm happy to do that as well.
Yes, thank you. I do would like them to both speak. I think both Wade and Gina are on the same line there through their computer.
Gina and Wade, can you just confirm that you're both on coming in from the same link? Just want to make sure I'm not leaving some. Okay, great. Thank you.
And I see someone who's labeled as owner. Is that Mr. Riesenberger?
Yes.
Okay, all right. So this is an appeal by the Weavers. And since it's an appeal, there's no need to swear in the appellants because they're making arguments, not factual presentations to the board. So Mr. Wishar, am I pronouncing that correctly?
Pretty close. It's actually Weishar.
Weishar, Mr. Weishar, I apologize. If you would like to present your arguments to the board, this would be the time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Peter Weishar, and I'm an attorney with McConville Considine in Rochester. And as you know, we represent Wade and Gina Weaver in connection with this appeal. I appreciate the discussion at the beginning of the appeal section of this agenda about the standard of review. We did include the recitation of the section of the town law that Mr. Vanderwall read at page 7 of our letter of intent. So if you need to reference that at all. So the Weavers are appealing a decision that was made in connection with a complaint that they made. And I just want to kind of summarize what's in our papers and then allow the Weavers to talk a little bit more particular about some of the concerns that they have. So the Weavers
Actually,
have decided,
if I could cut you off for one minute, I just want to recite at this point what materials have been provided to and shared with the board so that at the outset, everybody's clear as to what we have. We received the appeal, which included your letter of March 5th, 2020, and had attached to it Exhibit A, which was a letter from you dated October 18th, 2019 to Ms. Ivers. And then as Exhibit B was a letter dated January 7th, 2020 from, from Mr. Brennan to you. Exhibit C was a real property appraisal that was dated July 1st, 2017. And Exhibit D was a chart that was prepared relative to the history of the application. In addition, we received a memo from Ms. Ivers dated May 1st of 2020, which summarized the basis for her decision. And we received, we actually received your letter of April 30th, 2020 as well, which I think was in addition to the earlier letter of March 5th of 2020. And then I had also requested, and it was distributed to the board, was a copy of the, I believe it was a Freedom of Information request that your clients filed on, well, maybe not, I don't know. It's dated January 3rd of 2017. And that also included the notice of decision from this board that was filed with the clerk and dated December 30th, 1997. A letter dated January 15th, 1999 to the code enforcement officer. A notice of decision from this board filed on February 22nd, 2001. The minutes of a regularly scheduled meeting of the Zoning Board of Appeals of the town of Arundecoit from December 4th, 2000, pertaining to an earlier application with respect to 258 St. Joseph Street. Then there was a notice of amended decision that was filed February 26th of 2001. Then there was another notice of amended decision dated February 26th of 2001. That's the filing date. Then there was a notice of decision from October 30th, 2002. And there was a notice of decision also dated October 30th of 2002. I'm not sure, that may be a duplicate copy. Then there was, looks like copies of index cards relating to different matters from November 6th, 2000, October 7th, 2002, February 5th, 2001. Hold on. April 9th, 1962. October 6th, 1997. January 1st, 1999. February 5th, 2001. I may already have mentioned that. Then there's a looks like an old tape location map. There's a short environmental assessment form dated May 1st of 2017. There's a copy of an application that was received April 7th of 2017. There was a letter from Land Tech to this board dated March 30th, 2017. There was a letter from Arundecoit Landscape dated March 23rd of 2017. And then there were a number of photos that were attached to those. In addition to all of that documentation, we also were referred by you, and I know that at least I watched, and I believe other members of the board as well, watched the video of the hearing that was held in May of 2017. And the reason that I'd asked to be provided with all of the documentation was because of the 7 members of the board who were present in May of 2017, only 3 remain on the board at this point in time. So I felt it would be beneficial for those of us, such as myself, who were unable to be present at that meeting or not on the board at the time, to have all that documentation available for us so that we had a clear, or as clear as it can be, understanding of what was being discussed at the time. So I'm sorry to have interrupted you, but I just wanted to clarify for everyone's sake what all it is that we have received and considered.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to briefly highlight some of what you just mentioned, so in our materials, the complaint letter, what I call the complaint letter, is Exhibit A, which is my letter dated October 18th, 2019. And attached to that complaint letter were all of the relevant, variance decisions. And also, because of there were so many over a long period of time, that's why I summarized them in Exhibit D to our submission, to try to summarize what they granted and what the relevant conditions were. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. So a little bit of background. The Weavers have resided at this location next door to Arundecoit Lawn and Landscape since October 2005. At the time that they moved in, the business was already operating pursuant to a use variance that had been granted in 1997. But over time, the nature and intensity of the use has changed, and the Weavers question whether the use is being operated within the confines of the code and the conditions of those variances that were granted.
All right, now, at this point, I just have a question for you. You're making reference to a use variance granted in 1997. My understanding is that there was a use variance granted in 2002, correct?
So there were, let's talk about that. So there was a use variance granted in 1997. That was the original use variance, and that permitted them to operate a landscape business at the property in a residential district. And the findings?
It purported to limit it to a period of 5 years and the current owner, correct?
That's correct.
All right. And my understanding, and I'm sure council will correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe that those conditions are enforceable. They weren't. Isn't that right? The use variance runs with the land.
I believe that's true.
Okay. All right. So because it was limited improperly to a 5-year period, the applicant came back in 2002 and a new use variance was granted, which continued the 2 improper conditions, except limiting it to 10 years instead of 5, but continuing the ownership stipulation, which isn't proper, correct?
I believe that's true also.
Okay. And then neither the town nor the applicant was aware or recalled that that variance by its terms, proper or otherwise, expired in 2012 and that gave rise to the 2017 application that was heard in May of 2017, correct?
I believe that's true also.
And that one is not limited to the owners and not limited in time, correct?
That's right. They formally eliminated those two conditions.
Okay.
So, those are the use variances, but there are also several other variances that were imposed over the period of time. And there was also an interpretation rendered in 1999 pertaining to the original use variance. And for example, the 1999 interpretation was asked, the board was asked whether or not the piles of landscaping materials, such as earth, trees, and wood chips, whether or not that was considered part of the approved landscaping business. And the board found that it was, provided that they're kept at a residential height and are screened by plantings such as trees and shrubs.
What is a residential height?
Well, that's a good question. That
The next appeal is from a case that involves an interpretation of a 25-foot height restriction in the town. So is 25 feet the height restriction?
I think it's lower than that because, and I think that this board also thought that it was lower than that because through a period of 3 different variances over the course of 2 months in 2000, in December of 2000, and then January and February of 2001, there were a series of what the board referred to as area variances that pertain to the bulk storage of landscaping materials and the pickup trucks present on the site. So these variances, these 3 variances generally permitted parking of 2 pickup trucks. They permitted storage of piles of material, and the materials were limited in height, 10 feet wide, 20 feet long, and 10 feet high.
And
So,
do you know what code provisions were varied by those variances?
I do not, but so when you
'Cause
look at
I'm not familiar with any requirements, and Ms. Ivers in her memo indicates that the town code does not contain restrictions on the height or width or depth or area of piles of material for a landscaping business or number of vehicles associated with a business. So if there's no requirement, then the variance isn't varying from anything.
Well, so I guess I must apologize because I haven't been provided with a copy of that memo, so I don't know what you're referring to.
Well, would you like us, I don't want you to be in the dark as to anything on this. I'll be glad to, we can go ahead and have a discussion, and then I would give you access to have Ms. Ivers provide you with that, and then we could come back and finish this up in June.
We also plan to read into the record any communication to the board.
Okay.
That was the
Chairman, I
plan.
was going to make the suggestion, perhaps Ms. Ivers could read for the board her memo or give an overview just so the attorney for the complainant has an opportunity to respond.
All right, well, why don't you, since he hasn't seen that, because I want him, when he, makes his argument to him, I want him to be aware of everything that we're aware of. So why don't we take a moment now, Ms. Ivers, and have you read that memo for Mr. Weissar. Did I get it right that time?
Yes, you did.
Okay, good. I tried.
Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and read it right into the record if that's okay with the board.
Yes, please do.
Oh, you're on.
But I need you to be unmuted.
Oh, forgive
Yep.
me. Hold on one moment. See,
All
I
right.
told you it was gonna happen. Hold on one.
We'll start over.
Okay. The memo is dated May 1st and it's to the Zoning Board of Appeals. And it's from me. And it starts with, I wanted to provide the board with.
I hate to interrupt that, but I do it regularly. I just want Mr. Weissar to understand that memo was generated at the request of the board. It was not
Oh.
something that Ms. Ivers submitted to us on her own. And so that's why you probably didn't get a copy, because we asked for it.
But I think, I mean, one comment I would have though is we did send a letter in October of last year asking in essence, the same questions that we're asking you. And instead of Ms. Ivers responding with this memo, we got a different response. So, I mean, I guess I would have appreciated having the response at that time before we pursued the appeal. But I'm interested in hearing what the memo has to say.
Certainly.
The property, which is located in the rural residential district, was first granted a use variance to operate a lawn and landscape business in 1997, with a condition that the applicant come back to the board for approval in 5 years. In 2002, a new use variance was granted to the property. In reviewing a complaint received in the fall of 2016, town staff realized the use variance granted in 2002 contained a sunset clause. The owner of the property was notified by the town that the second use variance granted had lapsed, and a new application to the Zoning Board of Appeals was required. At that time, the property owner reported to me that he did not realize the second approval had imposed a time limit, and he also indicated that he was never contacted by the town in any form advising him of the need to reapply. The owner made application for a use variance, and the case was heard by the Zoning Board of Appeals in May 2017. During that meeting, the applicant was granted a use variance with no future time limits imposed and with no conditions specified. The application was approved, quote unquote, as submitted, based on the representations as to the business operations in the application material. No petitions to appeal the ZBA's use variance approval were filed within the required 30 days of the record of motion being filed with the town clerk. Any code complaints received for the property after May 2017 were evaluated against the granted use variance. In January 2019, the town issued a code violation for the outdoor storage of an enclosed utility trailer because the trailer was not associated with a lawn and landscape business, and as such was not contemplated by the ZBA in their granting of the use variance in 2017. The trailer was relocated by the owner, and the code complaint violation was closed by the code enforcement officer as soon as visual inspection was possible. Deep snow had prevented access to see the condition to confirm it passed inspection. In enforcing the town code as it pertains to the lawn and landscape business at this property, it is my position that the 2017 use variance is the standard by which compliance with the code must be measured. The variance was granted based on the conditions and description of operations submitted in the application and testimony provided during the public hearing, and did not impose any special conditions or limitations. Further, activities that are conducive with the business operation as presented to the board in 2017 are not subject to code enforcement action because the ZBA granted the relief required for the business to operate at this location. Any variance issued prior to May 2017, example, use variances or area variances related to the business use of the property, were negated by the most current use variance on file. Since no specific conditions or restrictions were imposed with the 2017 approval, the town's code enforcement staff and or I cannot arbitrarily impose limitations when enforcing the code. This was summarized and conveyed to the complaining party via their counsel in a letter from Deputy Town Attorney dated January 7th, 2020. The town is tasked with monitoring adherence to the representations contained in the 2017 application materials and will continue doing so. Except for the storage of another business's enclosed trailer noted above, it is my interpretation that the activities on site currently and in the past are consistent with the use variance granted to this property. The current appeal of my enforcement of the code at this property appears to challenge the underlying use variance granted by this board in 2017, which should not be permitted almost 2 years after the fact. My office's position is that the existing variances on the property, use variance in 2017, and area variances for replacement storage structures 2019 could stand based on the foregoing analysis. And what I would say is this also sort of in summary summarizes the town's response to the attorney that was provided through our deputy town attorney, Dan Brennan, at the time.
Correct. All right, so Mr. Weishaar, now we now have that out there, so please continue.
All right, so I guess I don't necessarily agree that it was a new variance in May of 2017. During the hearing, the board advised the Weavers that it was just a renewal, and and also during the deliberations, it was clear that the board wanted the prior conditions and findings incorporated into the renewal. And so, as I was about to talk about earlier, the conditions that probably most concern my clients are the conditions that were contained in the 3 variances, or perhaps they could be viewed as, they're listed as area variances, but they strike me more as use variances in December, January, and February of 2000 and 2001. And those pertain to the parking of the vehicles. They pertain to the materials stored on the property, and in the conditions that were set forth really most recently in the final of those series of 3 variances, the one from February 2001. And so my clients believed when they were—
I'm sorry, but excuse me. I go back to my earlier question. And in order for an area variance to be granted, it has to allow for a deviation from a code provision. Now, I don't know why there were area variances that were even entertained for an aspect of a business operation that, as far as anyone's been able to tell me, isn't a subject of a regulation in the code.
With all due respect, I think that they're listed as area variances, but an area variance is something more dealing with typically like dimensional or physical requirements of a property. It's things like the setback requirements, where these variances that we're talking about in 2000 and 2001 strike me more as use variances, because they pertain to the use of the property. And it seems to me that even though, because right now, because this is a residential property, and what was granted was a variance to use it as a landscaping business.
Excuse me. My understanding is that this property is in 2 different zoning categories. One is residential, and the other is a rural something or other that the name of which escapes me.
I think the notice refers to the property as being in an RR rural residential district.
That's it, yes.
So it's a residential district, and by virtue of the use variance, it was granted the ability to operate as a landscaping business, a business use on the property. Right. And so it strikes me that the way that you can read these variances to be consistent with what variances are for is that they're actually use variances, or really modifications of the original use variance. Initially, there was this first interpretation about, the piles. Could they keep piles? Well, they have to keep them at residential heights. And then these variances talk about what is, I think they are interpreting that further about what is the residential height. These variances that are called the area variances are really, to my mind, they're more designed to mitigate the impacts of the neighboring residential properties.
And would the board have the authority, once a variance is granted, to allow for an operation of a business in the absence of any specific provisions in the town code pertaining to the operation of the business, to years later, in this case 2 or 3 or 4, say, oh, we're not going to let you do this in your business as part of it without a subsequent approval? Is that something that the board can legitimately do?
It would depend what the original approval said and what type of conditions would have been imposed to mitigate those impacts.
Well, was there conditions in the original use variance? I don't recall seeing any.
I believe
That's-
that you could read the finding. The finding in the 1997 variance implicitly required the applicant to park their vehicles in a certain way behind an
Well, I
existing
don't-
barn.
I'm sorry, that's where I have a problem is with implying conditions. Since I've been on the board, and this is I think I'm in my 15th year now, every single variance that we've granted that we intended to condition specifically says this variance is granted on the condition that, and then whatever it may be. And we specifically list out those conditions. The clearest example that comes to my mind is anybody who wants to have chickens in the town. That's a special use permit. We grant the special use permit, but we have a list of conditions that we impose, and we specify very clearly and articulate what those are. The number of chickens, the length of time, where they can be located, how they have to be maintained. And every single conditional variance that I've been party to as a member of the board for the last 14 plus years has done that. Now, I know that it wasn't done in 1997, but you want us to imply a condition and then say that because that condition was implied, that it was necessary to vary it later, and it was varied later. But I don't see how, quite frankly, I don't see how any of those applications prior to 2017 were actually really legitimate.
Well, I wasn't there for the prior application, so I don't know what the board would have considered or why they would have imposed these conditions. But
Well, what conditions? Because it goes back to this issue of conditions.
Right. I'm talking about the conditions in 2000, 2001. Those are the conditions that most concern my client.
Well, and those conditions expired, let's assume they were conditions, expired in 2012.
How is that?
Because the variance was limited by its terms to 10 years.
The
2002.
Well, these 2000 and 2001 variances had no time limit.
Well, those are area variances.
Well, I think they might more be, I think they're, well.
Area or use, take it either way. Everything was recast and a blanket use variance for a landscape business was approved at that May 2017 meeting. There were no conditions attached to that variance, correct?
Well, I'm sorry, say that again.
The May 2017 variance that was granted a use variance in perpetuity for 258 St. Joseph Avenue for a lawn and landscape business, and there were no conditions attached to that variance.
It sounds like that variance might also have been unnecessary if the original 1997 variance is the variance that should be in play.
Well, except that the 1997 variance, for whatever reason, expired 5 years later, and the next one expired 10 years after that. So now here we are, 23 years later, with a business that's been operating at that location for 23 years. And I'm trying to figure out where these, what you refer to as conditions, how they are actually, I know how you view them, but I don't see them as conditions because they're not stated.
Well, they are conditions. They are conditions to the area variance. The variances from January and February, they are conditions.
All right, then that goes back to my earlier question. What are they varying? What code provisions? There, to my knowledge, there are no code provisions that relate to the number of vehicles that can be used in connection with a business, the types of operation that can be carried on as long as it's related to that business, the where vehicles, equipment, materials, and other things can be stored or parked, or how they have to be shielded. I don't find any of that anywhere in the town code. So what was the variance from?
Those resolutions don't say.
Right. They were, my understanding was, and this is reading somewhat between the lines, is that somebody complained about it. And so Mr. Riesenberger came in to say, hey, this is what I'm doing. This is what I've got. Is that okay? And he and the board worked out an arrangement in response to that complaint. But all of that predates the 2017 variance. And that variance was related to the business that he was running. I don't see where there's any limitation on the number of vehicles he can have, the where he parks them, what equipment he's allowed to have. Quite frankly, I even had a problem with the trailer that was moved, because my understanding was it was a trailer that belonged to some organization that he was sponsoring as part of his business. And so it arguably, to me, that even would have been okay, but everybody just moved the trailer, and that took care of the problem and eliminated that. And, you know, obviously you can argue that putting a trailer that relates to something that the business is only sponsoring isn't related to the business, although I think it clearly is. There's a reason that businesses sponsor softball teams, baseball teams, soccer teams, hockey teams, and all kinds of activities in the town and the community. So I think that's related to the business, but he did that. So that was the only one that of those 8 things that were listed that seemed to me anyway to have any possible merit.
I don't know. I don't recall that was part of our appeal, but there is something else that is part of our appeal that we haven't talked about. And that is one of the items, there's storage of material on a neighboring property. Is that permitted?
The neighbor has apparently granted, and there's, I guess, from what my understanding of the discussion that was had at the May 2017 meeting, is that there was a question as to where the boundary line was, and that neighbor had signed a affidavit saying that if it's over the property line, it's okay. But I don't believe that gives rise to any appeal on behalf of the Weavers, because it's not related to their property. And
well, it's a neighboring property, and they complained about it.
Well, I haven't seen any request for a variance or any violation, and it would be tough, I would think, to do that if you don't know where the boundary line is.
I don't think that's what's in this record.
Well, I don't see anything in this record with respect to that is an issue. I don't think that pertains really to this at all. That's just my view.
So I believe that was in our appeal letter.
It was.
And the attorney for the owner, I think in his response letter, conceded that they were storing material on a neighboring property. Seemed to me to be expanding the business beyond the boundaries of the property. So that's one of the issues that we raised.
Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, and so that I think that's properly before this board. So I guess I want to just allow the Weavers a chance to talk about some of their concerns and what they heard at the May 2017 meeting.
Okay.
Mr. and Mrs. Weaver?
Yep, here. When we did come into the renewal meeting that night in May, we did ask that we told the board that, you know, we didn't have a problem with the business being there. we just wanted to have the past decisions that were on the record here, supposedly, I guess, to be followed. And the board basically stated that, and the attorney said this is just a renewal, so any past restrictions would still be in place. And I don't know if you watched a video of that meeting that night, but they did say that at the end. And
I did.
Yeah, so I don't know if what they meant by that then, because if they said the past restrictions were still in place and that they should be, followed. But I guess now don't have to, but it sure sounded like it that night. And that's why we're here now, because it seems like two different things were said, from the meeting and then what's going on at the town hall there.
Well, the variance was granted, but it wasn't granted with any conditions. And generally, when we grant a variance, we always make reference to the fact that what was in the application that was submitted, but it's not, unless there's a specific condition that says it's limited to what's specified in the application. It's background and it's part of the findings that are usually made, but the variance itself is what it says it is.
Then I feel like we were misled that night then, because when we asked, they told us that if we had any problems with how it was being enforced, that we could come back to you. You told
And you're
us.
here.
But you said that there were no problems now. Now you're telling us that there's no restrictions at all. If we had known that, we would have been back here 30 days later.
Well, I didn't say that. I wasn't at that meeting.
You certainly said you saw the video though.
I watched the video. Yes, I did. And I will concede that the video appears to be confusing at times. The board members appeared to be confused. They asked for and were provided with the papers that I requested after viewing the video.
Go ahead.
But and I agree that there was some may have been some confusion on their part, but what the variance that was granted was not conditioned on anything that was specifically set out and stated. And as I said, for the last 14 plus years, any conditional variance that we've granted has very specifically set forth what conditions are being imposed so that everyone's clear. Was it clear in May of 2017? I'll grant you that it may not have been.
All right. I mean, if we were sitting there, we brought up the issues and
you did
the limits, and if I don't know how you would feel if you were on the other side and you listened to their answers to everything, and it sure sounded like it was okay, this is just a renewal only, and the past stipulations on how it could operate were there, but
well, I
under that,
since you asked how I would feel if I was in your position, I'd be dealing with a business that had been there for 20 years.
Yep.
And I had been there for 12 at that point.
Yep.
So the business was there when I moved in.
Yes. But it evolved over time. They're expanded,
Of course it did. I don't know anyone who operates a business that does not want that business to grow, flourish, be profitable.
Yep.
Every business wants that. I don't know a single business that starts off saying, well, I'm going to get to a level and then I'm going to stop and I'm not going to grow anymore and I'm not going to do anything and I'm not going to respond to anything that my customers indicate that they want that I'm capable of providing because I'm just going to stay stagnant. I don't know of a single business that does that.
Oh, no.
But that's not what Mr. Riesenberger said that night. He said he had no plans for expansion.
Okay. Does that mean that he can't expand his business?
No, but that was one of the conditions that you sought to make your determination.
I don't believe the board sought a representation from him that he would not grow his business or that his business wouldn't continue to grow. His business has been there since 1997.
Mhm.
It's a lawn and landscape business.
Yep.
That entails having trucks that move material, trucks that bring material, material being on hand to use, equipment on hand to use. The fact that he has somebody there to repair it on site, the equipment that he uses, as opposed to having to take it to a outside location to be repaired, doesn't alter the use at all. It's a lawn and landscaping business. And it appears from, I mean, I've been down there and looked 3 times in the last week and checked it out from different angles. And it appears to me that he's done a above the board job of trying to mask that business operation from the road. The fencing and the landscaping that he's put in at on the side of the property by your property. I don't know that that could have been required, but he's done it. And it seems to me that he's tried to ameliorate the conditions. But I've said this before and I'll say it again. I understand that you may not like certain aspects of the view that you have from your property of his property, but nobody is entitled to preservation of the view that they want unless they buy the property that's within the view.
Oh, understandable, but yeah, we just felt like nobody was on the same page that night, I guess, on
Oh, everybody seems to be
decision-making
on
and-
different pages. I agree with you.
And, I just felt that, it could have been just, it doesn't seem like it's, when they're all sitting there saying, yep, the past restrictions still apply, what was in the papers there on what was presented and what was, approved in the past, but then again, it's.
So let me ask you this question.
Mhm.
If, is it your position that if Mr. Riesenberger finds that it's necessary to buy another pickup truck,
Mhm.
that he has to come to the town and get approval for that?
No, I don't feel that bad about it, no.
All right. And if he wants to have 10 piles of mulch delivered instead of 8 in a year, does that require approval from the town?
Well, no. They didn't have anything about the number of piles on there. The location they had in there, but.
There was a complaint about the piles and what was being delivered and how it was being stored. Those were complaints that were raised in 2017.
Right, yeah.
And they're raised again in your attorney's letter. Number 3, number 2, number 1 refers to the number of vehicles. 2 and 3 refer to the piles. 4 refers to the topsoil screening machine. I don't know of any use for a topsoil screening machine other than in a lawn and landscape business. Trailers and other equipment. I mean, if he gets another trailer to tow mulch to a job site, does that require town approval?
Well, we were just looking at the, what the past decisions were by the board. We're nothing, going forward from there. We were just looking at the back. We didn't understand that for all these years, the board was making the wrong decisions.
It certainly seems to me they were.
Well, exactly.
But that's all we can go by.
I
is
mean,
what's
that's what
in-
we go by, and that's what we're under, and I mean, what are you supposed to do? I mean, if you make a decision and we're going by it from the past decisions and all of a sudden it's changed, it's, wait a minute, it's like.
Well, let me.
I understand your side of it too. I mean, I understand that side.
Let's get to the heart of it. What is it that you think is wrong with the business that he's conducting, that he's allowed to conduct at that property?
Well, we were just looking at, like I said, like the stipulations that the board had on there. That's what we were going by, is, the past stipulations on, the location of the piles, the size, just what they had in here before on what they allowed and from the, the board's decision in the past. That's what that's what I was going by.
All right.
And,
and then, so the complaint was registered with the town and the town replied, and now you're appealing. So let me ask you, what is it what result would you want to come from tonight's hearing? What would you ask us to do?
Well, I was just looking for the past stipulations. That's all we were looking at, like from what they stated
So
that
that-
night at the meeting,
All right, so what you would like us to do is to determine tonight that if Mr. Riesenberger wants to get another trailer, he needs to come in front of us and tell us why and get our permission. And if he wants to get another truck, he
No,
needs
not
to
that.
come in.
not
Well,
that
those are,
extreme. But I mean, if that's the past decisions, I mean, I'm not gonna, I'm just saying they
That
should
is
been,
your-
they
but
should not.
that's what's in your attorney's
Right.
letter.
Right.
Right,
So,
but-
well, you tell us how many trucks are supposed to
I
be there
mean,
then.
they had them in this one. I don't know what, if it was all wrong, they should have said it that night at the meeting to say, these past ones were all wrong. They should have never been in there. That's what we're
Well,
saying.
Well, that's what I'm asking you.
Yeah.
How many trucks do you believe Mr. Riesenberger is allowed to have before he has to come back in front of the zoning board and
Well,
ask us
right.
to let him get another truck?
Well, we're just going off what the board allowed. That's what we're going by. And
Okay,
past decisions. That's what we're going by. What was all the the different things that are in there that what was allowed. The size, the location of the piles behind the rear screening. We're just going by that.
Okay,
If he went over once in a while, it wasn't a big deal. We stated that at the meeting that night.
right. So back to my question. What do you want us to decide tonight? How many trucks he can have, how many trailers he can have, what equipment he can use. These are the things that are less set out in your attorney's letter.
But we're just looking at the decisions from the board is what we're looking at, is what we're looking at from the past, decisions. And that's up to you. That's up to the board, whether they wanted to follow them or not, I guess.
It seems like the main concerns are though, Wade and Gina, aren't the concerns really where the piles are, how high the piles are, what type of equipment gets used on the site, the things that have an impact on your residential use, right?
Correct. Yes.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, if I may, just a couple of comments from my office.
Certainly.
So while I had the pleasure of sitting with the board in the years leading up to 2017 and through 17, I was not at this particular meeting. My colleague Ashley was there. I spoke with Ashley. It's the position of our office as outlined in Dan Brennan's letter of January 7, 2020, that the board action in 2017 superseded the prior use and area variances. And I took a look at the area variances, and one of them in particular, relating to the mulch piles, actually had a sunset clause on it that said, the mulch pile can be of a certain dimension until the mulch pile is depleted. So I think it's a bit of a stretch to try to loop in those types of conditions into the 2017 action. What I would say relative to the Weaver's concerns is the 17 action, the determination to grant the use variance was made based on the application materials that were submitted, including a detailed site plan. So I would, to the extent that there's lingering concerns, I would encourage the board to take a look at the parameters of the application materials and view the current operations in comparison to the 2017 application materials and the representations made. I think it's difficult and beyond your authority to look any further and potentially look back into the late 90s or early 2000s. I think the appropriate inquiry is how does the business line up to what was represented in 2017.
All right, I was just trying to get at a practical matter what aspects of what is taking place that's generated this appeal, and what, in a perfect world, what do the Weavers want from our board in relation to Mr. Riesenberger's business? You've told me you don't want, that it's not necessary to limit the number of vehicles that he has, although then you say that you want to limit, or how many is he allowed.
I'm having some trouble hearing because there's some background noise.
Yeah, I think I'm going to ask, I don't know if there's anybody that's tuned in that is, I'll see if I can end the volume. That may have fixed it. I do apologize. Somebody was unmuted on my side here. One of the other,
But you muted,
one of the other applicants who is still on, I hadn't unmuted them, and I've done that now, and it seems to have fixed the problem. I do apologize.
Okay.
but the Weavers are muted right now.
They are. They shouldn't be.
We temporarily muted ourselves.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, thank you. I was trying, I'm like, oh, I think they're unmuted already.
So what is it that you're looking for from us tonight?
Well, like I said, it's like, I haven't nailed it down and everything. We're just looking at what the past was allowed there, and, that's what we were coming in front here for. From,
Which
the past,
was the number of piles, was the
the location and the size. And
the materials, the operations, how it was being
where they're
used.
supposed to be stored.
Aren't those business related decisions?
I don't know. They were in here though.
That was, but
they
it was
were in
our
there.
understanding that those were in force by the
Okay.
2017
They're supposed to be in
decision.
the rear, back behind the screen in the rear. And really nothing up front by the houses on either side.
I
mean, it's
I didn't see any piles
from the road
up in the front. No, I drove all the way back to the big pile at the back in the muddy area that's all its way at the rear of the property.
behind the screen.
There were mulch piles behind the new pole barn, and there were piles across from that, but I didn't see any piles of materials up in the front area. There are a lot of potted shrubs and plants and
the plants, they're plants,
yeah. But I didn't see any piles, and the piles that I did see certainly were no higher than 10 feet.
Well, like I said, we're just going off of what the past decisions were. So I guess there was no past decisions. That's what you're saying. That's basically what I'm getting the gist of now, I guess.
Well, I'm just trying to understand what it is that you're looking for from us, because he's been allowed to run his lawn and landscaping business at that location since 1997. The prior owner of your property came in and spoke in 2002 and said it was wonderful and he had no problem. So I'm trying to figure out what it is that you view as a problem so that I can figure out if there's a way we can effectively address that for you.
Like when we moved in 2005, it wasn't as big as it was over there. I mean, and it expanded, but when we were reading what was allowed in here, and then as it slowly went on, and we got along fine for years, no problem. But then when it started getting big, it was like, I was looking at the variance and talked to him a couple times, and things would improve a little bit, but then would creep back out again, and then so I'm just going off of what's on the what's in the past variances here on what was allowed. I'm just going by that, and that's what I was under the impression.
Under our impression, then it would have been nothing behind the barn, except for the piles of mulch from the barn to the pine trees in the back, and everything was supposed to be behind the pine trees in the back. And that's when we moved in. There was nothing out there.
Yeah. I mean,
now
we did send pictures. We had pictures that that we showed, but I'm just if the stipulations weren't there when we looked at it before we bought the house, I don't know if we would have bought the house then if it was like if there was they can expand however big they want. I would think that since it is a residential area, even though it's rural residential, I still would think there would have been. It's not commercial. It's I would think something would be there, but
well, the use variance let him use it for a commercial use.
Yes.
His business.
Yes.
So
I thought there was stipulations there though. So
so what what I'm gathering from what you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, you want us to limit his business to the extent that it was in 2005.
Or whatever the past,
That would have been, yes, that
we're
would have
going
been
by
the
what
last
the past
decisions.
decisions were, on the board, that we're going by. I mean, if he
So
goes
he
over.
can't,
Go ahead.
so he can't, from your standpoint, he can't expand his business without getting our approval.
Well,
That would have been on my understanding,
Yeah,
yes.
that's the way it sounded like in there. I mean, from what we're reading, I don't know. I mean, how big is expanding? I don't understand, is it, that's how we're going by. I mean, if it's
All right.
unlimited, I don't know what that means, If there's no restrictions, and I don't know what.
So is, to your point, is one truck okay? Is 50 trucks too much?
I don't know that we have the authority to tell him how to run his business. I'll defer to Mr. Brenner and Mr. Vanderwall on that.
Yeah, it would be difficult. As I mentioned, we should look back to the 2017 representations and any reasonable, the exercise of reasonable business judgment associated with the operation as it was approved and expansions necessary for its commercial viability. Now that, there's a balance there, Mr. Chairman, as you indicated, and as the Weavers indicated, this isn't an operation where it goes from 1 truck to 100 trucks, but there's some gray area in between. And I do think that we're operating in the spirit of the use variances granted in 17, as far as I understand the code enforcement officer's investigations and site visit.
If I may, Mr. Chairman.
Certainly.
I do like the idea of what Mr. Brenner suggests about going back and looking at the representations that were made, and if that requires, a tabling of this to allow that to happen. I think it's very important here because, as often happens when you have neighbors involved in a zoning dispute, there's a fair amount of tension between the neighbors. Council accused the Weavers of harassing the business, and the business placed signs and cameras, I think, indicated at the Weavers' property. And we just, the Weavers are just looking for some, give us the parameters. Let us know what is appropriate and not appropriate for this business use, because at least over the years, there were purported to be conditions that were imposed, and there were representations made at a series of, at the different board meetings. And so if this board could kind of interpret, what those conditions or limitations are, then I think that would be helpful.
All right, I'm looking at the letter dated March 23rd, 2017, from Mr. Riesenberger to the Zoning Board of Appeals. In his letter, he indicates that the property is currently, before that, he indicates upon taking possession of the property, many enhancements have been done to the property. Single-family home and barns were remodeled, driveway and parking areas were installed, over 100 trees and shrubs were planted, structures were painted, windows replaced, and a new pole barn was erected. The property has been buffered from street view and neighboring homes. A 200-foot-long solid vinyl fence has recently been installed to screen out a southern neighbor who faces the rear of the property, which I assume is the Weavers. This property is currently being used as the company office, storage facility for trucks and equipment, stockyard for container-grown plants, and nursery area for field-grown perennials. We store piles of varying colors of hardwood mulch, compost, and soil in the rear of our property. We also have different varieties of stone, sand, and concrete pavers on site used for our hardscaping operations. Refuse materials such as grass clippings, excavated soil, and wood chips are accumulated and then recycled via an on-site screening machine. Reclaimed materials are then used in future landscaping projects. All lawn maintenance and landscaping equipment are stored inside buildings, with the exception of the small soil screener located in the very rear of the property. The company vehicles, consisting of 3 dump trucks, 1 stake body truck, and 4 pickup trucks, are stored outside on a paver stone parking area, shielded by numerous trees. The single-family house is currently being used for rental purposes, and is registered with the town of Arundecoit. Business hours are approximately 7:30 a.m. to 6 o'clock p.m., Monday through Friday, and Saturdays 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. In a typical year, our season begins in early April and ends in early December when the snow flies. We do not plow snow in the winter, and the office is closed December through March. We typically do not work weekends in July and August in order to spend time with our families. Employees arrive at work via car or bicycle in the morning, load trucks, and are gone until late afternoon. Main activity and traffic occurs from 7:30 to 9, and then again from 5 to 6 in the evening. Client interaction is done at the customers' homes and online. We do not sell any products or services on site. We employ local town residents and special needs individuals from West Arundecoit High School. We have respectfully coexisted with our neighbors for the past 21 years. Our property is located in a former agricultural area of the town known as the Flats. According to a previous zoning board, December 21st, 1997, the subject parcel is quite large, 5 acres, and is located in a unique area, characterized by low-density rural development, wetlands, and open space. There is adequate room to park cars on site out of the view of neighboring parcels. We believe it is the ideal and perhaps only plausible location in the town of Arundecoit for a full-service, environmentally focused landscape company. The Flats is a working man's domain, comprised of neighboring businesses up and down St. Joseph Street. There are plumbers, roofers, auto body shops, counselors, cigar manufacturers, and another landscape operator on the same street. On the next crossroad, there is a photography studio, movie producer, motivational speaker, and another roofer. All businesses in the Flats have had the pleasure of peaceful enjoyment of their businesses. Our landscape business is ideally suited for this location due to the available commercial districts, or to the available space for composting, growing plants, and storing building materials. Other designated commercial districts would not be conducive to our storage, growing, and recycling needs. We have positively responded to the one single neighbor who voiced concerns over the visibility of our business by relocating soil, mulch, and compost materials. We have relocated screening equipment to the rear of the property. We installed an $8,000 vinyl fence and 24 additional trees along the border, and even switched our air compressors to ultra quiet models. We have spoken to nearby residents to assure there are no other latent problems, and there were none. Arundecoit Landscape was incorporated in 1987. Sales and scope of operations have grown from a maintenance company to a full-service landscape design install company over the last 30 years. Business volume peaked in approximately 2013 and has declined slightly in the past few years. There are no immediate plans to increase sales, employment, or capital assets in the near future. We have reached a mature level of business development and are in a maintenance stage of growth. Future administrative constraints, such as minimum wage increases, workers' comp, New York State cost of doing business, do not give incentive for growth. Our firm has been an industry leader in volunteer and philanthropic work. I have been a board member on numerous charitable boards, and I am currently president of 2 not-for-profit organizations. We have received industry, community, religious, and not-for-profit awards for our efforts. We are the biggest landscape industry supporter of town of Arundecoit events and community volunteer projects. Our gift-in-kind donations are visible on Town Hall grounds, Gazebo and Pioneer House Gardens, Camp Eastman, Town Cemetery, Hooker Cemetery, Sunset House, Arundecoit Food Cupboard, Seabreeze Memorial Garden, Briarwood School, Rogers School, Arundecoit High School, Josh Rojas Park, Mommies for Miracles Park, Senate Park Zoo, St. Thomas Church, Stepping Stones, former West Arundecoit Library, Arundecoit United Church of Christ, etc. Lifetime total of charitable gifts in Arundecoit alone have exceeded $150,000. We are very vested in our town and continue to repay our community for our good fortune. Thank you for your consideration in granting a permanent special use permit for our business. Our 30-year track record of business operation, quality service, and positive reputation speak for itself. I have been fortunate to accomplish everything I desire personally, and am now committed to setting the stage for the next generation. With your support, we will hopefully be here in another 30 years. And the 30 years is a reference to the fact that the business, although it relocated to St. Joseph Street in 97, was actually organized and incorporated in 1987. So that was what was presented to the board by the applicant in May of 2017. The applicant's representative submitted a letter that simply addressed the reasonable rate of return, the unique circumstances, whether there was any, would be any change in the character of the neighborhood, and the factors that the board is required to take into account in determining a use variance, but it didn't contain any factual information such as number of vehicles, number of piles, amount of equipment, or anything like that. So that was what was presented to the board in 2017. So in using that as a yardstick, what is it that is the problem now?
I don't know, like we said there at the meeting that night, we didn't have a problem with it. We just wanted to have the past stipulations to be enforced, but I guess there is no past stipulation from what you're saying now, I guess. So I wish we'd have known that on, 2017 or even 2005, basically.
Well, if you'd known that in 2017, what would you have wanted the board to do then? Because I assume that's what you're asking us to do now.
Yeah, well, the board seemed like, okay, the past stipulations are in effect. Like you said, they were kind of confused on what they voted on.
All right. So how many vehicles, you want us to limit the number of vehicles he has?
Well, I was going by what their decision was, not anybody, I was going by what the past decisions were, is what I was going by. So I don't know.
I'm asking you now, tonight, May 4th, 2020. Yeah. What is it that you're asking this board to do for you?
Well, we were looking at the past decisions, but I mean, I don't know. We really didn't talk about that. I mean, so,
well, what we had was to limit the number of vehicles, limit the number of piles, and
the location.
And the location of them. That's what we were concerned about.
Where do you want the piles located?
Well, it showed there in the site plan that they were supposed to be behind the evergreen screen in the rear of the property. So I don't know if that, I guess they couldn't, I guess that's not correct either from what they approved.
Well, when I drove back there 3 times in the last week, the piles were behind the new pole barn.
Yep, right.
Well, that's the rear of the property, right?
No, the rear property.
Did you look at the site plan? And did you see the evergreens behind that? And then you go behind there. That's where it's.
So you want it further back?
That's where it was on the site plan that was approved. Yes, is where I'm saying that site plan that was approved.
What site plan?
If I may, the board's task tonight is to review the appropriateness and correctness of the code enforcement officer's determination.
Correct.
As summarized by Attorney Brennan's letter. So there's not much we can do to impose new conditions tonight. It's either an up or down vote as to whether or not we think the determination was correct.
I was just trying to clarify what it is that the Weavers are asking us to do by virtue
We're just
of
very
this
confused. We're very confused on, what was presented that night by the board on what their vote was and how they did their decision, and then how they were, I guess, wrong. And now we're kind of like in a dilemma here.
Because I think the Weavers, didn't you raise the concerns about whether or not there was enforcement, whether or not these conditions were being upheld? And then the board told you on that night that that this is just a renewal, and that it was going to, I think there was a notion that these conditions are going to continue forward. But aside from that, there's a the site plan that I think we're talking about is in our materials in the Exhibit A to, it's part of our letter, but it's attached to the February 26, 2001 letter. So it's kind of, towards the end of Exhibit A. And there's a sketch on a piece of graph paper that shows, I think, where the existing evergreens are and where the hardwood mulch is supposed to be.
Okay. It's something dated, are you referring to what's January 15th, 2001?
Looks like that's it, yes. So, I guess the Weavers expressed their concerns about these conditions, and they expressed their concerns about the conditions in the property, and they were told it's just a renewal. If you have a problem with the conditions, the prior conditions, file a complaint. And so that's what they did.
Okay. So what relief, you're their attorney, what relief are you asking us to grant? You're asking us to reverse the decision, right?
Yeah, and tell us which conditions apply. And if conditions apply, then to require the town to enforce the conditions. But I mean, I understand what your position is tonight or at least what your position is.
Yeah, I seem to have
occupied
most of the discussion. I apologize for that.
I mean, we think that these conditions, I mean, the Weavers, the placement of the piles, those types of conditions, behind screening, those types of things, those are the types of things that would mitigate the impact on the residential property. And that's what they thought was in place. And those are the issues that they raised at the time in 2017. And they were told that it's just a renewal and that there was a representation or I don't want to mischaracterize it, but before they issued the approval, before they voted, it was clear that they were intending those prior conditions to continue. And so, now they're not.
Well, I agree with you that it was told that it was just a renewal of the use variance, but I don't necessarily agree that there was an intention to limit the business operation. But I've talked for enough. Let's hear from the rest of the board. Mr. Upson, I see you're right below me on the screen. That's why I called on you. Anything you wish to, any questions or comments?
No, actually, I'm on top of you on my screen, but that's all right.
Oh, okay.
No, I'm still trying to mull this over, trying to remember what we did back in 2017. That sketch plan that was mentioned, it's in the Exhibit A.
Yes.
I don't have a copy of the old application package. But Carrie, do you know if that was in the application? I don't recall seeing that.
Brett, are you referring to the 2017 application of what was submitted for the use variance?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out where that sketch plan that Peter was
talking about. It's part of Exhibit A.
Yeah, I got it here, but we didn't have that at the May 17th meeting, did we?
No, that would have been back from what was it, 2001. So that would not have been part of the, that would not have been part of the 2017 application.
Okay.
The applicant provided new documents and letter, and I believe also a drawing showing the operation at the time of submission.
Was there a colored drawing from Land Tech?
Michelle can verify the 2017 application materials, but I believe you're correct. So that's what the zoning board would have been acting upon in 2017.
At that time, okay.
Okay, Mr. Scott, you're now below Mr. Upson on my screen. Ms. Bickett was there before, but you're there now, so. Is there any questions or comments that you wish to add?
I want to make sure that I understand exactly what we're considering, and from what I'm gathering, we're looking at the application that was submitted and approved in 2017 and how that relates to Ms. Ivers' memo and the decision that was made at the previous board meeting. So where I'm failing to see the connection between the 97, 2002, and those limitations that were imposed, considering that I was not at that meeting. I have not seen the video of that meeting. So I'm going off of what's in the application that was approved. and as that stands and how that relates to Ms. Ivor's decision. So that's what I'm looking at. And I mean, if council can elaborate and confirm that that's the correct approach as to what we're to consider for this decision, because this is not simply we're not approving a variance with this. This is a little bit different. I
This
think
is
that
a
would be
bit different, and your understanding, Tim, and characterization is appropriate. That's the right way to evaluate it.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, that's the only question and thoughts I had.
Okay, next up on my screen, I see Mr. Antini.
My question was going to be about the same, excuse me, as Scott's. You know, how they relate to each other and what was proposed in 2017. I got a sketch from 2001, so I don't know exactly. I didn't see anything. I was trying to go online to get on it to watch the meeting. I couldn't get through.
Okay, Ms. Bickett?
I think council clarified any questions that I had, so I'm all set for right now. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Hart?
No questions at this time. Thank you.
Mr. Travis?
I'm all set. Thank you. Rob clarified everything.
All right, I think that takes care of everyone on the board. Mr. Weishar, is there anything else that you'd like to add, or the Weavers?
You know, I guess, you know, we're just looking for some clarity. If you can, if it turns out that there are no conditions that apply, then, you know, that would be helpful to know that too. We think, you know, that in our papers, we do think that those other conditions should continue to apply. And I'll let the Weavers make any other final remarks if they have any they'd like to make.
We just also feel that the same conditions still should apply. And I'm kind of disappointed for those of you who've not taken a look at that video from 2017, because it certainly in our point of view was pretty clear that that board at that time intended for those stipulations to stay into place.
Anything further?
No.
All right, then we'll open this hearing up to public input at this point. Is there do we have any people who wish to be heard with respect to this application?
Chairman, I do have somebody who's got their hand raised on the call. So in a moment, I will activate them. So if you'll just be, and I'm just going to check email while we're also waiting to make sure that no other new email communication came in to the zoning board at irondequoit.org.
Okay.
I don't see anybody with a new email, so I'm going to let, there is a speaker who wants to share feedback during public hearing.
Okay. Are you there?
They should be, okay.
Hi, thank you. This is Ted Baum speaking. I'm actually the attorney for Mr. Riesenberger. I submitted the April 30th letter. I'll be brief. The issue as I see it is whether the use is consistent with the 2017 use variance that was granted by the town. Whatever discussion took place at the board, I think is somewhat irrelevant. What's relevant is what was the use variance that was granted that was not appealed. And as Ms. Ivers pointed out, she did an investigation. She determined that there weren't any violations of town code and there weren't any uses that are inconsistent with the lawn and landscape business. Chairman Hinman read from the application. All that information is consistent with the current property use. I didn't hear anything inconsistent about the way the property is being used now. It's all consistent with the lawn and landscape business. And the issue is whether the complaint was properly handled and dealt with by the town. I believe it was. If Arundecoit Lawn and Landscape suddenly engaged in a large-scale road building business and had massive trucks, that would not be consistent with a lawn and landscape business. And then you'd have an issue that you'd have to deal with. But as things stand, I think the complaint was properly handled, was properly determined, and the board has sufficient information to be able to rule on the appeal at this time. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, sir. Is there anyone else that wishes to address the board with respect to this application?
I don't see any other hands raised on the call. I will remind for anybody who's joined us more recently that *9 is how you would raise your hand on if you're dialing into the meeting from your phone. And if you are logged in as a Zoom user and you're joining the meeting that way, there should be a pull down menu option to request a turn to speak or join the meeting. So I'll wait one more second to see if any of that happens.
And while we're waiting, Carrie, I'd like to make mention that I do have a letter that was received by a property owner at 258 St. Joseph Street, dated April 30th, 2020, if you want me to read that into the record.
Yes, please.
This was directed to the Zoning Board of Appeals, Weaver Appeal at 258 St. Joseph Street, dated April 30th, 2020. Dear members of the board, I am writing in regard to the most recent legal complaint filed by my neighbors, Mr. and Mrs. Wade Weaver. My attorney, Ted Baum, has sent a detailed response to their complaint against the town of Arundecoit. I would like to simply state that we, have been law-abiding town business since 1987. We have owned the property at 258 St. Joseph Street since 1997 and have made substantial improvements to the property. We have established excellent relations with most of all of our surrounding neighbors. We have experienced peaceful enjoyment of our property for at least 5 years before the Weavers purchased their home. Over the course of the last 24 years on St. Joseph Street, we have complied with any and all requests directly from the Town of Arundecoit Building Department. Any complaints or issues that have arisen from the Weaver residents have been dealt with expeditiously and to completion. We have put faith and respect in the wisdom of the town zoning board and done everything we have been instructed to. Any past violations have been resolved between Arundecoit Landscape and the town building department and code enforcement. We have never been subject to fine or court appearances for lack of compliance. As always, we simply request the privilege to continue operating our landscape business as we have for the past 33 years. It is our strong desire to maintain positive relations with the town of Arundecoit and continue to contribute to our community in a very positive way. Thank you for allowing my family and I to work our land, nurture our plants, and continue to prosper. Respectfully, Jeff Riesenberger. The other one I do have is also addressed regarding to the Zoning Board of Appeals dated April 30th, 2020. And this is from Mr. as well. And if you want me to read that as well, Mr. Chair. Or
who's that from?
Mr. Baum.
Sure.
Dear members of the board, I represent Jeffrey Riesenberger, the owner of 258 St. Joseph Street, which is the property subject of the appeal referenced above, filed by Wade and Gina Weaver. The Riesenbergers has operated Arundecoit Lawn and Landscape at the property since 1997. As an initial matter, the Weavers' appeal is necessarily limited to the January 7th, 2020 response to a complaint filed by the Weavers. Although the Weavers' appeal references a number of prior determinations of the Town of Arundecoit Zoning Board of Appeals, the earliest of which predates the appeal by more than 20 years. Pursuant to Town Law subsection 267-A, all determinations which predate the appeal by more than 60 days are untimely. And then he quotes Matter of Clark versus Town of Sand Lake Zoning Board of Appeals, 52 AD 3D 997. Accordingly, it would be improper to the ZBA to modify any prior use variances in connection with the pending appeal. The only matter properly before the Zoning Board of Appeals is the January 7th, 2020 determination by the Town Attorney Daniel F. Brennan. The determination concerns the October 7th, 2019 complaint by the Weavers. In other words, any use variances previously granted by the town are simply not before the ZBA at this time. The sole issue is whether Attorney Brennan properly determined that there are no violations of the Town of Arundecoit Code and that the property complies with any conditions of the variances that are currently in effect. Appeal Exhibit B, this determination was proper. As set forth in more detail below, the Weavers connect a number of supposed limitations and conditions which simply do not exist. As Mr. Brennan properly observed in the determination, there are no such limitations or conditions. 3 years ago, the decision dated May 1st, 2017, the ZBA granted to Mr. Riesenberger in perpetuity a use variance to continue operating a lawn and landscape business on premises 258 St. Joseph Street in an RR rural residential district. The only restriction in the 2017 use variance states the applicant shall not undertake any construction or site preparation work for the approved use without the issuance of a building permit from the Town of Arundecoit, and a building permit is also required for any work already completed. Similarly, the prior use variance granted in 2002 was limited only in time. It is significant to note that the Weavers appeared when the ZBA considered and granted the May 2017 use variance. During that appearance, Mr. Wade Weaver stated repeatedly that he did not oppose the use variance. He merely wanted the use of the property to conform to the limitations of the use variance. So as long as the use conforms with the use variances, there is no non-conforming use. And then he quotes another Scarsdale Shopping Center Associates LLC versus Board of Appeals on zoning for the city of New Rochelle. The sole business purpose undertaken by Mr. Riesenberger at the property is to operate a lawn and landscape business. All of the activities complained of by the Weavers are consistent with such use, which is why Mr. Brennan concluded in the determination that there were no violations of the town code and that the property complied with all conditions of any applicable use variances or variances. Neither the Weavers nor their counsel cite to any town code sections for which they believe any conditions at the property constitutes a town code violation. Accordingly, the only basis for complaint is a use which does not conform to the use variance. As the ZBA is well aware, use variances do not represent an inflexible snapshot of permitted uses, but instead uses that are permitted so long as to such use conforms with the purpose granted in the use variance. Indeed, even expansion of an existing business is proper so long as the business continues to operate as set forth in a relevant use variance. And he quotes Angel Plants Inc. versus Schoenfield 154, denial of a wholesale nursery's request for a building permit was improper where the use was consistent with existing use variance. With respect to the specific complaints set forth in the complaint, storage of vehicles, no limitation of the storage of vehicles is contained in the use variance or imposed by town code. Regardless, the number of vehicles stored on the property has remained consistent for the last 10 years and is consistent with the operation of a lawn and landscape business. Storage piles of material. No limitation of the storage piles of material is contained in the use variance or imposed by town code. As it has done for many years, Arundecoit Lawn and Landscape orders one truckload of material at a time. The piles of material are stored behind a row of 40-foot pine trees at the very rear of the property and are thus discreetly and carefully concealed from view. Regardless, the size of the piles of material stored on the property has remained consistent for the last 15 years and is consistent with the operation of a lawn and landscape business. Storage of piles of a certain size. No limitation of the storage of piles of material is contained in the use variance or imposed by town code. Regardless, the size of the piles of material stored on the property has remained consistent for the last 15 years and is consistent with the operation of a lawn and landscape business. Topsoil screening machine operation. Operation of a topsoil screening machine is consistent with the operation of a lawn and landscape business. The use variance does not prohibit the use of specific lawn and landscape business machinery. To the contrary, since such equipment is not non-conforming, it is expressly permitted by the use variance. Storage of trailers and other equipment. No limitation of the storage of trailers or other equipment is contained in the use variance or imposed by town code. Regardless, the trailers and other equipment stored on the property has remained consistent for the last 20 years and is consistent with the operation of a lawn and landscape business. The Weavers did not complain about an enclosed bicycle trailer for a triathlon team sponsored by Arundecoit Lawn and Landscape. The Weavers did complain about the enclosed bicycle trailer for a triathlon team sponsored by Arundecoit Lawn and Landscape. Due to the Weavers' incessant complaints about this trailer, it is no longer stored at the property. Operation of a repair shop. The business does not operate a repair shop, although it does perform minor repairs and maintains the lawnmowers, which it uses in its lawn and landscape operations. New York State Department of Motor Vehicles expressly excludes from the term motor vehicle repair shop the following, quote, any person solely engaging in the business of repairing road building machines, farm machines, lawn machines, garden machines, registered vehicles as special purposes vehicles, unquote, Part 82, Section 82.3B4. Accordingly, repairs of its own lawn and garden machines cannot constitute a repair shop open to the public. When major repairs are required or repairs to any vehicles, those are performed by a qualified mechanic off-site. No doubt if Arundecoit Lawn and Landscape failed to properly maintain its equipment, the Weavers would promptly complain to the ZBA. Construction of a greenhouse. What the Weavers describe as a greenhouse is a temporary tent structure to protect plants in the winter and has no permanent foundation. No building permit is required. In any event, a temporary tent structure to protect plants is consistent with the operation of a land and landscape business. It is noted that this greenhouse was the subject of prior complaints by the Weavers to the town and was resolved by Mr. Riesenberger to the satisfaction of the town. Accordingly, even if this structure could be considered a greenhouse, is expressly permitted by the use variance. Storing materials on a neighboring property. The property owner of the neighboring property consented to storage of materials on his property in exchange for bartered services. There is no town code violation. The use variance does not apply to this neighboring property. This topic is not properly before the ZBA as it is not the subject of this appeal. Importantly, the Weavers did not purchase their property until 2005, 8 years after Mr. Riesenberger first began to operate Arundecoit Lawn and Landscape at the property. A consistent and continued operation of a business which predated the Weavers' purchase of their residence is no reason for the ZBA to entertain the Weavers' untimely attempts to reverse properly granted use variances. Sadly, the Weavers have improperly and repeatedly sought the intervention of this board. In the face of the Weavers' repeated but failed attempts to improperly restrain legal business activities, the ZBA properly approved Mr. Riesenberger's reasonable requests for use variances. Yet the Weavers continue to complain, appeal, and otherwise act unreasonably. The time has come for the Weavers to end their harassment of a legitimate business enterprise which has consistently operated within the parameters of the current use variance and within the bounds of the town code and other laws, and has been a good citizen of the town of Arundecoit. The Weavers' unjustified harassment of Mr. Riesenberger must stop now. Mr. Riesenberger reserves all rights in this regard. Mr. Riesenberger and I thank the ZBA for your continued attention to this matter. Respectfully submitted, McElroy, Deutsch, Mulvaney, and Carpenter LLP, Theodore M. Baum.
Okay, is there anyone else who wishes to be heard with respect to this application?
Chairman, I'm just confirming that I'm looking at the list of folks who are attending the meeting currently. I do not see any raised hands. I am also going to one more time check the email for zoningboard@arundequoit.org, and I do not see any, and I will just refresh my page real quick. I do not see any new emails that have come in to that, to the email address for the zoning board.
Okay, Mr. Weishaar, you get the last word.
For your consideration, as I said, I think just some clarity on some parameters would go a long way towards eliminating the questions that remain about what is permitted and not permitted. And I appreciate your time this evening.
Thank you, sir. We will close the hearing with respect to this matter and move on to the next item on our agenda, which is another appeal.
Next case on the agenda, case number ZB 2020-05-4. Upon the matter of request by Knopf Shaw LLP, acting as agent for Kirsten Werner to appeal the Director of Development's interpretation regarding a height variance not required on premises 930 Rock Beach Road in an R1 residential district.
Okay, and the appellant is?
If you hold on one second, so Alan Knopf is here. I will unmute him, and then I believe the owner, the applicant, is also here. So hold on one moment while I activate their ability to join this meeting.
All right, but by the applicant, you mean Mr. and Mrs. Brinkman?
No, they're not the applicant, so I believe, is it?
It's Mr. Knopf.
Yeah, and Mr. Tantillo is going to be making the presentation,
Yeah.
my associate.
Hi, guys. I'm also on. Also an attorney at Knopf Shaw.
Okay.
And then the applicant is Kirsten Werner. I think she's showing up as Kiki Voss on the list. Carrie, you're muted.
There she is.
So I just added, she was appearing as Kiki Voss, so, but she's been added. Kiki, or I'm sorry, not Kiki, but can you hear the, are you able to speak now?
Yes.
Okay, I assume, Mr. Tantillo and Mr. Knopf, I assume that you're going to have Ms. Voss speak to us at some point. Since this is an appeal, I never have attorneys sworn in, and since it's an appeal, there's no need to swear anybody in because nobody's making factual presentations that would be relied on. You're simply presenting different views concerning a decision that was made that's being appealed. So, Mr. Tantillo, I'll yield the floor to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Evening, everyone. My name is John Tantillo. I'm an attorney for Kirsten Werner, the appellant here, who resides at 896 Rock Beach Road. Ms. Werner is appealing a determination by the town that a building being constructed at 930 Rock Beach Road does not require a variance from the zoning code's maximum height limit. The owner is building a house and put in a letter of intent dated February 16th, where they requested an area variance to exceed the building height by about 10 feet 5 inches. This was based on zoning code section 235-33C's maximum building height of quote, 25 feet as measured from ground level to the ceiling of the second floor. By all accounts, the ceiling of the second floor reaches a height of a few inches over 35 feet. So the applicant put in a variance request. Subsequently, the night this board was scheduled to hear that variance request, the town apparently decided that the applicant no longer needed the variance and the application was pulled from your agenda. That's the decision that we're appealing. Before I go into detail about that, Ms. Werner is on the call and she just briefly wants to describe the relationship between her property and the development site and the impact that the extra 10 feet would have on her home.
Hi, could everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for your time. Again, I'm Kirsten Warner. I live at 896 Rock Beach Road. I've been at the house for 13 years with my 3 boys. I'm concerned and I'm asking you to please review the case because the proposed house is going to be built directly to the east of me. And not only does it interfere with the view, but a building that high going 10 feet higher than the height requirement also has a major factor on, because it's to the east of me, blocking the sun on my property. And I think if the house was held to the 25 feet, it would not have the same negative impact on my property. I'm sure my attorneys are going to go through this, but I believe a variance is required for a few reasons. One, the Brinkmans themselves acknowledged to me that they would need a height variance in a text that they sent me on the 25th of February. But in addition, in that code 2235-33C1, it says the max building height for a single family dwelling shall not exceed 25 feet from ground level to the ceiling height of the second floor. And basically, how the code's being determined is the ceiling height is being determined at the base or the bottom of the vaulted ceiling, where the vaulted ceiling is beginning. So in essence, if you read the code that way, then the structure could have unlimited height in theory. So the structure could be 200 feet high, which I think is a really strange precedent that's being set. And so I guess my question to you is, how can you permit an interpretation of the code that does not limit the roof height? The next thing I was hoping that I don't have clarification on, and maybe you could shed some light on it, but it mentions ground level. And how does the walkout basement go into the calculation for the overall ceiling height? And then I guess I'm a little hesitant to mention this last point because my lawyers would probably advise against it, but I'm going to just say it because it's a concern. The building or the structure is being built only 12 feet away from the very steep slope. And so you're 12 feet off of basically a cliff or very, very steep slope. And then you're going down 10 to 12 feet. So my next question would be, in the event of a slope failure, will the Brinkmans be required to replace the slope in kind? So that's all I have. And again, thank you very, very much for listening tonight and taking this into consideration. I'll turn it over to John now.
Thanks, Chris. You're kind of doing my job for me with a lot of that, but I'll talk a little bit more about it. So really just any interpretation that doesn't result in this project requiring the 10-foot height variance really makes no sense here. A plain language reading of the ordinance makes it very clear that the variance is required. Since I want to make it very clear, there's no ambiguity here. The ordinance says to measure height from ground level to the ceiling of the second floor. This is an ordinance limiting maximum height. So, I mean, obviously an ordinance limiting maximum height looks at the highest point. The ordinance sets a maximum height, which then cannot be exceeded. To interpret it otherwise would be to render the 25-foot limit entirely meaningless, like Kristen just discussed. You know, to get around it, an architect could only need to have one very small portion of the second-story ceiling at 25 feet, then could go literally as high as they want with the rest of the ceiling. The town's interpretation here would have the practical effect of essentially eliminating the maximum height requirement in this zoning district, which would be a terrible precedent to set going forward. frankly, I expected this to be a fairly uncontroversial reading of this particular ordinance, since, you know, as Kirsten said, it was also the applicant's reading of the ordinance in their initial papers. I hope you guys have their February letter of intent where they applied for the variance.
We do.
Yep.
At least I do.
However, I was forwarded some correspondence this morning by Michelle from the developer's attorney, who has come up with a somewhat more creative reading of the ordinance that says that the maximum height should be measured from the lowest point of the ceiling instead of the highest point. The letter from the developer's attorney also mischaracterizes our argument as somehow based on roof height, which review of our papers and what we've said tonight hopefully demonstrates is not the case. We're not trying to get you guys to calculate based on roof height, just the highest point of the ceiling for the maximum height.
I hate to interrupt you. Although I do it. The ordinance refers to the second floor ceiling height, right?
Right.
And the other ordinance you're talking about the roof. The other definition goes to the roof, correct?
I'm hoping I'm not talking about the roof at all. That was something that the developer's attorney kind of tried to argue that we were saying, but we're not. It's not in our papers. It's not our argument. We're not.
I guess all right. So here's my question then to you. In this situation such as this, where there is no second story ceiling, how do you measure?
There is a second story ceiling in this situation.
That's the roof.
No,
the inside of the roof, right?
No, the applicant submitted a height plan. I don't know if you guys have that too. Let's see. Could I share my screen as a attendee, or is it not possible?
I have no idea how this works.
I don't think that's possible. And I think it's largely a security issue as far as, so if the board has everything that was submitted, again, the board has everything that was, everything that was submitted as part of the application. And additionally, any revised drawings that were submitted to the planning board were also forwarded to the zoning board as well.
Gotcha. So the document I'm looking at is called Revised North Elevation, if you guys have it.
Let me find that. Where do you find those?
It's just a separate document for me. I was forwarded the entire application package.
No. Where do you find the label? You said revised.
The actual file name. Oh, but also on the bottom corner, it should be.
It would be probably in the title block, Jim.
Okay, I see basement level. Then I have. I'm sorry. Give me a second. It's very small.
The formal
my
title.
apologies. This is 930 Rock Beach revised north elevation layout. That PDF document.
Yep.
Is that correct?
Yep.
Okay.
And then the actual title on the page is just called North Elevation in the bottom right corner.
All right, I'm trying to find it. Okay, I see it. North elevation. A 2.0. It says below that.
Yep, that's the one.
Okay. All right.
So then if you look on the right side of the diagram, there are a series of vertical measurements.
Yes.
Okay. So the innermost measurement is to the existing ceiling. So that's the ceiling measurement as the applicant put forward to and as as a common sense reading of the plans show. That's where the ceiling starts, is 24 foot 11.5 inches. I think under a typical, so it's a little atypical, this ordinance defines building height based on ceiling instead of roof. But I think under a typical ordinance, the roof height would be measured from the highest point of the roof, which would probably be either that chimney, or it would be that kind of half circle on the peak. But that we're not arguing that's the case here. That's something that the developer is kind of claiming we're arguing. We didn't argue that. We are saying that the height should be measured from the 24 foot 11.5 inch dashed line, which is the same reading that the applicant put forward to you guys before it was pulled from your agenda.
Say that again?
So we're arguing that the 24-foot, 11.5-inch measurement line, that innermost one, is where the ceiling should be measured from. Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, no.
I was going to say, wait.
That's the bottom.
That's what they're.
No, we're not saying that.
Yeah. So we are arguing from the middle line is the highest point of the ceiling. The 35-foot 4 7/8 inch point of the ceiling, which is the maximum height of the second floor ceiling, as the developer put to you guys and as our letter to you guys indicated. Sorry about that. Thanks for the catch.
All right. So you're saying, if I understand you correctly, that it should be the 31 feet 5. I can't even with the magnifying glass. Oh, wait a minute.
No.
31
feet. In
feet.
there. The one in the middle, the 35-foot 4 7/8 as the highest point of the ceiling, which they've labeled their ceiling peak.
Mr. Chairman, I believe on the drawing, it's labeled as ceiling peak, master bedroom.
Yes. Okay. And then midpoint of, there's another line, midpoint of the roof, which my recollection from prior applications is that that's also some measurement that's used in the code, right?
Yeah, so the situation here is that this is in the LWRP, which has a additional set of dimensional guidelines that kind of supersede the underlying zoning district. So if this wasn't in the LWRP, you would use that outside one, the average of the roof. But because it's in the LWRP, you use the middle one, the height of the second floor ceiling.
Or in the case of what the town determined, the other height of the second floor ceiling.
Right. Well, so the town is saying that the ceiling should be measured from the lowest point, whereas because this is a maximum height restriction, it should be measured from the highest point, because if you don't measure from the highest point, then you can have an unlimited height.
Okay.
We just need to have that tiny little part at the end there at 24 feet, and then the peak could go as high as they want under that interpretation, which obviously would not be what the town would want their code to be interpreted as.
Well, the peak of the roof could only go to whatever height the necessary slope of the roof would go based on the dimensions of what's underneath it, right?
Well, they could make it as steep as they want. It could be a decorative kind of parapet if they wanted. But they could go much higher than it needed to go.
Well, the figure of a 200-foot roof was thrown out. I don't see how that would even be feasible.
It would require a difficult slope of roof, but
sure would.
Something 100, I mean not 100, but something significantly higher than what they've done here is permissible under this interpretation. 200 is hyperbole. It could be much beyond what the town wants the height to be.
Go ahead.
Oh, that's all. I just have there's another point in our letter that addressed this automatic stay, which the developer's attorney contested. At this point, I think that's a moot point unless you guys reserve tonight. But it's not surprising that Mr. Goldman contested it, since he and I are actually currently litigating that in a separate case. If you do want to get into it, I can send some additional. But
I don't think we need to hear about the automatic stay. It's,
right.
From my viewing of the property again the other day, doesn't look like anything's happened. So
yeah, that also makes sense.
All right, but let me ask you a question. That the property owner puts forth in their letter, and that is that suppose this house were to be constructed with a normal ceiling at that 24-foot, under 25-foot height that's shown on that north elevation figure. And then 2 or 3 years or 10 years later, the owner decided they wanted to take the ceiling out and open it up. Would they then have to come and get a variance at that time?
Could you clarify, take the ceiling out and open it up? There would still be some ceiling.
No. Suppose
Well,
they
I think
My
I think at
scenario
that
is
point-
this, they build this house, they put in a ceiling at that under 25-foot level. No variance is required because it's measured to the height of the second floor ceiling. They sell the house several years later, the new owner says, oh, we're not using anything above that. Why don't we open it up, put in a sunroof and let light in? Do they then have to come and get a variance?
Sure.
Yes,
Well, and I think-
absolutely.
yeah.
because-
What I
Yes,
think
they
the
would,
develop-
because they would be going against the code,
Yeah.
right?
Even
Here,
though
let me,
the
let me clarify
outside
that.
of the
Hold on.
house, even though the outside of the house hasn't changed one.
So yeah,
in.
what I think the
But the
developer.
code doesn't,
Hold on, Kirsten, hold on 1 second. So what the developer is arguing is that, our interpretation is wrong because it means that internal modifications could require a variance without the outside of the building changing.
Right, that's
the case under their interpretation too. If there's an attic and then there isn't, that would still require a variance, even under the developer's interpretation. It's, to be honest, a somewhat strangely worded ordinance that is measured by ceiling height instead of roof height. But under either interpretation, it would result in a variance being required if only internal work is done.
We have several strangely worded ordinances that we work with. All right, so your position is that an interior change would require a variance, and that they should be required to apply for an area variance. Okay, right?
Yes, our position is that they need an area variance because maximum height should be measured from the highest point, not the lowest point.
All right, so let's assume that you're right. And there's 5 factors that need to be addressed in determining whether or not to grant an area variance. The first is whether there's a possible change to the neighborhood character. We're talking about the construction of a residential structure in a residential neighborhood, right?
Right.
So there's no change to the character of the neighborhood.
Well, I think the dimensions of a building can affect the character of a neighborhood, even if the use is the same use as the surrounding buildings. If this building is, as a result, much higher than all the surrounding houses, then it could change the character.
All right, the applicant submitted a number of pictures and I drove along that section of road. There are extremely large houses along that section of Rock Beach Road. Some of them appear to even have more than 2 stories, but let that one go for a moment. The alternative that doesn't require a variance would be to put in a ceiling, right?
Sorry, put in a ceiling?
Yeah. If they put a ceiling in on the second story, instead of having it open to the top, if they wouldn't need a variance.
It would not need a variance if they didn't have the decorative slope ceiling.
All right, so the difference between the house and needing a variance is whether there's a ceiling or not. Then the third.
Well, if I could interject, it's also, they could have a flat roof or a lower roof, so that's not the only alternative.
Okay, all right. Then how low would the roof have to be?
You could have a flat roof.
Yeah, the implication is if their ceiling is flat, there'd be no reason to have a giant spike on the roof for any other reason than to, make your property more objectionable for your neighbors.
Well, I can think of a lot of other reasons besides just that one, but I understand why you cite that.
Well, no, if it was filled in, I mean, if there was a ceiling, a flat ceiling, if it wasn't accessible, if it was just a, design feature.
All right. The substantiality of the request from the outside in terms of the neighborhood itself.
The 10-foot variance on a 25-foot standard, I would say was fairly substantial.
can I
But
chime in for one?
But if it had a ceiling, then it wouldn't need any variance at all. So
If the ceiling was flat all the way across, yeah.
Yes.
If it was maintained the 25-foot code requirement, it would not need a variance.
Right, so the roof could be exactly as it's proposed.
So the roof that doesn't have a ceiling under it, that's just a not hollow kind of spire on the top of the house?
No, I'm talking about they put in the second floor ceiling that goes flat across at that just under 25-foot level. The rest of the plans are the same as they are. Same roof line, everything else.
I think that's what I'm confused with here. What are you envisioning is in this kind of arched structure here if the ceiling is flat across 25 feet?
I have no idea what they might use it for. They might use it for storage. That who knows? What I'm talking about is from the impact on the neighborhood. I'm looking at it from the impact of the houses that are around it, the residential character of the neighborhood. But for the fact that the plans don't have a ceiling at the top of the second floor that goes straight across from that just under 25-foot level. If that was the modification to the plan, then they could build it exactly the way it's laid out in the drawings, correct?
Well, what you're advocating.
Yes, but can I say one thing for a moment? When you're saying that there's very large houses in the area, the large houses are on a significantly lower altitude. So this house with the 35 feet is going to tower above all of the houses around it. Even the large houses are way lower than where this house is being built. So it is going to be significantly higher than all the houses around.
And just and further, what you're advocating for here is really the problem with what we're talking about. If you don't measure this thing from what we're talking about, you can.
Well, hold on. I just want to correct one thing. I'm not advocating for anything. I'm engaging in a discussion concerning your arguments, the limitations of your argument, and the factors that are required to grant or deny, to take into consideration in granting or denying an area variance, which is what you say they would need. So I'm trying to understand the parameters and the extent of your argument. And that's why I threw out that if they put in that ceiling just below the 25-foot mark, we're all agreed they wouldn't need a variance. Is that correct?
If there's
if they put the ceiling in and their intention was to go a year and then take out the ceiling,
it's not my
and
question.
not need a variance to do it.
That's not my question. My question is, if they put the ceiling in at that 25-foot level, are we all agreed that it would not require a variance?
If their ceiling peaked at
Correct.
the 25-foot level, they would not require a variance.
Well, you say peaked.
Peaked. If the highest part of their ceiling was under the 25-foot standard, no variance would be required.
So if the ceiling was straight and flat and level across at that.
Yeah, like the line on the map indicates, the 25-foot measurement goes to, or 24-foot 11 and a half. That would not require a variance.
All right, and the house could be built exactly as it's laid out on the drawings if it had that ceiling.
I mean, Mr. Chairman, I think what you're coming up against is the strange nature of the height being measured by the ceiling, not the roof.
I agree.
Yeah, if it were me, I would measure it from the roof, but the ordinance is what it is, and it's the ordinance the applicant made their application under, and that we're making our interpretation of it.
Mr. Chairman, also, I'm not, in the residential district, I think you can only have a 2-story building. So I think what you're suggesting might almost be a 3-story building, because then you've got this extra space.
Well, I don't know.
But with all due respect, the issue of the area variance is just irrelevant for tonight as applying the test. This is a de novo review of the interpretation of the code, and we're speculating on something that's not before the board.
Well, I'm not speculating. I'm trying to understand what it is that makes your client believe that an area variance is required. And I'm trying to separate, and I believe that what it's come down to is that there's no ceiling on the second floor.
No, there is a ceiling. It's they're arguing where the ceiling should be, where the ceiling height should be measured from, either the lowest point, as they say, or the highest point, as we say. And because it's a maximum height limit, we say that it's measured from the highest point. But they're not. Their papers acknowledge that if there is a ceiling, and there are two different points you can measure from.
I realize that. The issue is whether the town was unreasonable or whether we disagree with the town's decision on how you measure it. Right?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
To clarify, not whether the town was unreasonable, whether you disagree.
Whether we disagree, correct. Yeah. Okay. I'm sorry for interrupting.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Sure.
I want to make sure we understand the scope of what we're trying to decide. If I'm understanding the last few sentences I heard, what we're trying to decide is whether or not we agree that the maximum height of a ceiling should be measured from its maximum point or from its minimum point, as it was measured and determined previous to us making a determination as to whether or not a variance would be granted. We did not make a decision one way or another. We were not presented with a variance application, correct? We're asking, did the town correctly measure the height of that ceiling? And we could decide to measure how high a ceiling is from its lowest point or from its highest point. Am I understanding the issue at hand here?
I think that's accurate.
I would agree with that. That's right. From the perspective of the town, the charge here is to analyze Carrie's interpretation and determine whether the way she applied the code to this particular project was correct, and whether or not a height variance is required based on the application of the height regulations in the LWRP overlay district.
So determining that the town was incorrect in measuring that would not prevent the initial applicant from presenting their case for a variance at a future date.
Right.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
But the inquiry shouldn't be, do they have an opportunity to be heard on another application? We should hone in on whether or not the determination was technically correct and not consider what alternative paths might be available.
Thank you.
Yep.
So if the board has no other questions, we request that the ZBA annul the determination that the project does not require a variance and require the applicant to go forward with their initial application for a variance. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Does anyone on the board have any other questions or comments with respect to this application before we open it up to public input? Seeing none, is there anyone who wishes to?
Mr. Chairman, if you don't mind.
Not at all.
Just, from my perspective, and this is just reading these documents in plain language and trying to understand the arguments that are being made, measuring a maximum from a minimum doesn't seem appropriate. And that's just the way that I'm reading this. Seems nonsensical. That's not considering any other measurement or ordinance considering the roof. That's just addressing the singular ordinance and measurement of the ceiling. That we would enforce a maximum height from a minimum measurement doesn't seem appropriate.
And Mr. Chairman, a suggestion for me, perhaps Carrie, if she's prepared to do so, ought to explain to the board or read into the record her analysis as to this matter, so that can be compared and contrasted with Mr. Tantillo's argument and any others that might be advanced by the public.
That sounds like a wonderful idea.
Okay, so I prepared a memo dated May 1st, provided to the zoning board per the chairman's request to provide some background. And so I'll read that verbatim right now. I wanted to provide the board with information related to my determination that a variance was not needed for this project. Prior to any application being made, the property owner's architect contacted the town about the review process associated with the proposed development of a single-family home at 930 Rock Beach. I had advised the development, I had advised that the development on the undeveloped parcel would be subject to planning board review pursuant to 235-76. I further advised that based on the size and location of the proposed home, there may be zoning relief required from the provisions set forth for that zoning district, R1 residential, which is outlined in Article 4 of the zoning code. The town received 2 applications in January, one to the planning board for waterfront development per 235-76 and EPOD permit, and one to the zoning board of appeals for proposed building height that exceeded the max building height in Article 4. While the project was under review of the planning board in February, staff were made aware of the provisions of 235-76 applied the height requirements set forth in 235-33C to waterfront parcels with more than 15 feet of shoreline. An updated elevation drawing and revised letter of intent, which addressed both planning and zoning, was submitted to the town on February 16th, 2020. Those drawings and the letter referenced the second floor ceiling height of 24 feet, 11.5 inches, which was below the 25-foot maximum height provided in 235-33C1. The planning board's approval of the project contained the following conditions: obtain zoning variances if needed. Upon further review of the revised plan and letter of intent, the following facts were considered in determining that no variance was required. 2 height restrictions could be applied to the property, one based on the property's underlying zoning district and the other on its waterfront location. The waterfront regulations adopted in conjunction with the town's adoption of its local waterfront revitalization program were intended to provide additional regulations for waterfront properties and apply additional and/or development standards. Additionally, in considering the 2 potential height restrictions, it is my understanding that when the town code is unclear or contradictory, the less restrictive regulations must be applied. The building height standards provided in the town zoning code and other bulk requirements are intended to regulate building massing, the exterior of the building. The distinction between vaulted ceiling or a second story with attic above only impacts interior space, not the exterior building massing. Therefore, the second story ceiling height from a massing standpoint is where the top of the second story wall intersects with the roof line. To my knowledge, the town does not require variances based on the property having vaulted second floor ceilings unless the exterior height of the structure exceeds the applicable building height. The definitions provided in the code should describe the terms as they apply to the town and should not dictate bulk and use requirements. With the above information, I determined that the variance the applicant had applied for was not needed. The ZBA agenda was amended to reflect that no variance was required. And I'll just further say that I think ultimately that the design of the building was looked at as if it had a standard, quote unquote, standard second floor with an attic space above in the dimensions as presented, there would be no question that it met the requirement for that was within the code requirements. So the fact that there is or is not a vaulted ceiling doesn't change the massing of the building here. And so that's why it was determined that and I think in consultation with the then deputy town attorney, in cases where the definitions or the code is gray, that it's the town is obligated to enforce the less restrictive, not the more restrictive And so that was the determination that was made at the time. And certainly not because and so that's just a summary of where things stand.
Okay. Did you want to add anything, Mr. Tantillo, before we open it up to public input or to further comments or discussion among the board?
Yeah, a little bit. I'll admit I didn't totally get all of that down. It was a little technical to get entirely verbally for the first time. But the part about when there are two potential restrictions, you apply the less restrictive. I think what's happening here is two different standards are being conflated. When a zoning ordinance is ambiguous, the town is supposed to apply the less restrictive interpretation of that ordinance against the property owner. I have not pointed to any ambiguities in the zoning ordinance. It by all accounts doesn't seem to be drafted perfectly as we're all kind of seeing tonight, but it's not ambiguous. It says measure ceiling height from the second story ceiling. Don't exceed 25 feet. What I hope isn't happening is that there's the R1 building height and the waterfront building height. And Carrie, was what you said, were you indicating that you were taking the less restrictive of those two standards?
No,
okay.
I was not taking the less restrictive of those two. There was ambiguity about which of the building heights should apply because there are two that technically do apply to this property. There's the R1 building height, which is 24 feet to the midline of the roof, not to the peak. That's how in our code, the height, if you look up height, that's the definition. And in this instance, because it's a property that's on the waterfront, a separate height definition applies here. And I'll further note that we don't have a definition of ceiling. And it doesn't, on our code, does not distinguish between a ceiling with an attic above or a ceiling that's vaulted. And further, that really becomes more of a building permit issue and a design issue for the internal space as far as the design goes. It wouldn't impact the massing of the building, and that's ultimately the intent of the zoning code, is a massing of the building and trying to provide standard or control or limitations for how big the building can be. And our determination was that as designed, where the roof line met the exterior wall, if they're proposing not to have a vaulted ceiling in that upstairs space, this would be permitted with no question. So the interpretation is that the code was not intending to control interior space or design.
Okay, so first I would just say, even if the code doesn't want to control interior space or design, I think by fixing the standard to ceiling, you necessarily have kind of gotten into that realm. If you'd stuck with the roof for the code, it wouldn't be getting interior. But zoning code 235-76C states that maximum building heights for those uses that are permitted within the waterfront development district, but that are proposed in other zoning districts within the town's LWRP boundary are subject to the restrictions of 235-33C. So to the extent there's any suggestion there's ambiguity as to what a measurement to apply, it's 33C is the section.
I would concur with that.
Okay. Then I think even if you're using the R1 districts, I don't think this is right, but I should point out at least, even if you're using the building height of the R1 district, it still needs a variance.
No, we weren't applying the R1 standard.
But just to be totally clear, even under the more permissive standard, they still needed a variance, a smaller variance, but a variance nonetheless. So, I understand the compulsion not to measure the height based on interior qualities. That's certainly how I would write a code. But I think under the code that's written, they're looking at the ceiling. If you're looking at the maximum height of the ceiling, you look at the maximum point of the ceiling. That's our argument, at least.
All right, does anyone else on the board have any questions or comments that they'd like to make before we open it up to public input? Seeing none, do we have any public input?
We have at least one raised hand in the attendees.
Okay.
Hold on one moment. I'm just checking email. We have no new emails received. So if you'll hold on one moment, I will activate the one person raising their hand.
Okay.
Hi, this is Jerry Goldman. I'm the attorney and agent for Shorewood Properties, who is the owner of the property at 930 Rock Beach Road. With us tonight in the group is our project architect, Jonathan Taylor. I don't know if he's raised his hand or will be asked to be muted, but he may have something to bear going forward on this. I'm not sure if Mr. and Mrs. Brinkman are on the line, but let me just say this, 25 minutes into this discussion, to say there's no ambiguity kind of is a fallacy. We have ambiguity here. One of the toughest things to do is writing code. One of the other toughest things to do is interpreting code. And the lack of definitions, as was pointed out, really does create a problem. We don't have a definition of ground level even. We don't have a definition of ceiling of the second floor. It is clearly different from the normal standard. Normally you don't measure from ceilings, normally you measure from roof heights. And in the R1 code, it's the average height between the eaves and the ridge. It's not even the peak of the roof. So, you know, to that extent, we have a great deal of ambiguity here. And Carrie, I think, pointed it out and set it out very clearly. But the other point that is out there is that if there is an ambiguity, it's got to be construed in favor of the least restrictive situation. And that's what we're talking about. And that is the ceiling of what would be the flat roof here, or flat ceiling of the second floor, and not the peak of the roof of this area. The ceiling, as a practical matter, is not a triangle which sits above. The ceiling is the area which is the point where it meets the roof. So to that extent, it's pretty clear from our perspective that Carrie's interpretation is correct in dealing with this, and that because ambiguities are to be construed in favor of the least restrictive situation, that the interpretation should stand. If there's anything that should be done here, perhaps there should be a recommendation to modify the code to clarify exactly what is meant to be addressed here. The point that the chairman made earlier, the early points which were made by the chairman dealing with, well, what if this were a flat roof and that was an attic? Good point. And, you know, the pitch of the roof is something which would determine the height thereafter. But clearly it was not meant to go to a peak, because if it was meant to go to a peak, it would have said, let's go to a peak. That is, you know, that's pretty much the gravamen of the argument. I don't know whether Jonathan, you have anything that you want to add to that?
Hold on for 1 second. He's raising his hand. I will add him to the.
Can you hear me?
Yes, you're on, Jonathan.
Thank you. I completely agree with everything that was just stated. And one of the things I wanted to touch on is the argument that the maximum height must be determined from the maximum height of the ceiling would inherently create all of these buildings in this district to have flat ceilings if there are two-story structures. Flat roofs, in fact, I guess, to have two-story structures. And if they had a 12-12 pitch, the roof would begin somewhere in the first floor level. And so my assumption is that there are many buildings already approved by the zoning board without any variances that would not conform to that argument in existence already. And the only other thing I would like to add is, we've been very clear and open about this whole process, and we're happy to pursue whatever we need to do. We agree with the town's decision in this situation. I think there's ambiguity in the zoning ordinance, but we're happy to do whatever we need to do. We would just like to complete the project as designed.
If I can add as well, I don't know if I'm muted or not.
You're not, you can still speak.
Okay, fine. One thing to be pointed out is in the R1 district, in addition to that 24-foot restriction that they had talked about, there's limitation to it being a two-story building. I would argue that the reason why it was measured as 25 feet from the floor to the ceiling was essentially definitionally to try to make this a two-story building. You aren't going to be able to get a three-story building that's over 25 feet. So essentially the 25-foot measurement was designed not necessarily to measure to a peak, but to limit the number of stories as it would be under the building code. So I think it's perfectly logical for there to be an interpretation to say that the ceiling is from the point of from the start of the peak of the roof, if you will, and the flat part of the ceiling itself, not the angled part of the ceiling or the roof.
Okay. Anything else, Mr. Golden?
I'm all set.
Mr. Taylor?
Thank you.
Did we have any other public input?
I'm double checking now as we speak. We have no new emails and I do not see any new hands raised.
I have a letter that was submitted by Woods, Ovia, and Gilman on behalf of Jerry Goldman.
Mr. Goldman, do you want us to read that letter into the record?
Might be muted.
Hold on one moment. I've got to let him speak again. Hang on.
Oh, okay.
Was that letter circulated to the board? Do the board members have it?
We do.
Okay, if we can just reference it and put it in the record, I don't know that we need to go through the exercise of reading it then.
Mr. Tantillo, would you agree with that, or do you want it read?
I think that's perfectly reasonable.
Okay, so you don't want it read, right?
Correct.
Okay, all right, just wanted to be sure about that. All right, Mr. Tantillo, since the public input portion is apparently concluded because there's no one else who has to speak, is there anything else that you would like to state at this point?
Sure. I'll just wrap up by saying, I think what Mr. Goldman is trying to do is create an ambiguity where there is none. The ordinance is very clear. It says maximum building heights for single-family dwellings shall not exceed 25 feet as measured from ground level to the ceiling of the second floor. That's fairly straightforward. It's a maximum building height. You measure from the highest point. And I just reiterate again that Mr. Goldman's interpretation would allow a building, maybe not 200 feet higher, just practically, but certainly 20 feet higher. It could happen. This is precedent you're setting for the entire neighborhood, and you need to interpret the code in a reasonable way here. Thank you very much.
And Mr. Chairman, if I could just add one point, the provision was added by local law 2 of 2015. So it is not, I don't know what the law was before that, but it was added in 2015. So
which provision?
The LWR, the provision, yeah, 235, 33C.
Okay, that lakefront provision.
Yes.
The one that talks about the ceiling.
Yes.
Okay.
And that's all. Thank you.
Now I'm confused. The fact that that was added in 2015, what effect does that have?
The only, I can provide an update on that. That local law references an update that was made to the code pursuant to the references for single family. And since that provision references single family, any place in the code where the terminology single family was referenced shows up as an update from 2015. That was when the definition of single family dwelling was updated in the code. And so any other reference to the term single family that was anywhere in the town code was also referenced in that local law.
Okay, and Mr. Knopf, help me understand.
Well, if that's the case, and as Carrie remembers, my client was responsible for triggering that amendment to the code on a different case.
That is correct.
I only brought it up in response to the architect's point about the other house in the neighborhood. I guess I don't really know what the code was when the other houses were built.
So 235-76 was, I believe, adopted by local law. And I'm going off of memory, and I will verify as we speak, but I believe it was added by local law in 1988. And I will verify that now. If I can use two computers at the same time, I'm testing my my multitasking skills. And it appears it was the additional waterfront regulations don't have a specific reference to them as far as when they were added or updated. However, I do know that these were adopted as part of the LWRP, and that dates back to 1988.
Okay, all right. All right. Does anybody else have any other questions, comments, anything anyone wants to add? I'm hearing silence, so I will close the hearing with respect to this matter at this point in time. And that, I believe, was the last case on our agenda for this evening, correct?
Correct.
So, normally at this point, we would take a break of 5 or 10 minutes. Does anyone wish to take a break at this point? Speak now or hold your peace. Nobody. Okay, so since we don't have anybody sitting in the room with us to normally apply our rules, we'll just go from the top of the agenda all the way through, unless someone wishes to do it in a different order. Seeing none, we will take the first case first. This is pertaining to the application that relates to the property at 158 Schnackle Drive. This is a type 2 action for seeker purposes. Does anyone wish to make a motion with respect to this application?
I'll make a motion that we approve it as presented. As the applicant mentioned, it's to replace an existing fence that's in disrepair and to keep her small dogs safe. It shouldn't impact the character of the neighborhood. It should actually improve it if we are replacing a fence that is in rough shape. I don't see any negative environmental impacts from this. The request is insignificant. It's also not created as not self-created, as I mentioned. The fence is already existing and in a poor state, and I don't see any alternatives, as she was cited for the state of the fence already.
Second.
Any discussion? Since I can't tell who's talking and who's not, because I don't have all. No, I know, Brian, I know you seconded it, but for voting purposes, I'm just going to run down the list and in the order that, well, I'll do it alphabetically. Ms. Bickett, how do you vote? Aye. And Mr. Hart?
Aye.
And I vote aye. Mr. Intini?
Aye.
Mr. Scott?
Aye.
Mr. Trevis?
Aye.
And Mr. Upson?
Aye.
Motion carries, 7 votes in favor, no opposed, no abstentions. No one is absent. We are fully constituted and motion carries, 7 votes in favor. Move on to the next application is pertaining to the property at 16 Birch Lane. This is a type 2 action for seeker purposes. Does anyone wish to make a motion with respect to this application?
I'll make another motion that we approve as presented.
Okay.
I believe this will have a positive impact on the character of the neighborhood. Again, there's a large portion of the fence that's already in existence. This will just complete that around the yard. It's a small variance, so it's insignificant, and I can't imagine any negative environmental impacts from completing the fence. The issue is self-created, however, to keep the dogs safely in their yard. They require a 6-foot fence versus a 4-foot fence. And I don't see any alternatives to keeping that animal safe on that property.
I'll second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, Ms. Bickett?
Aye.
Mr. Hart?
Aye.
Aye. Mr. Intini?
Aye.
Mr. Scott?
Aye.
Mr. Trevis?
Aye.
Mr. Upson?
Aye.
Motion carries, 7 votes in favor, no opposed, no abstentions. No one is absent. The board is fully constituted. The next item is the appeal pertaining to 258 St. Joseph Street. This is a type 2 action for seeker purposes. I'll make a motion that we deny the appeal.
I'll second.
Any discussion? All right, Ms. Bickett?
Aye.
Mr. Hart?
Aye.
I'm an aye. Mr. Intini?
Aye.
Mr. Scott?
Aye.
Mr. Trevis?
Aye.
Mr. Upson?
Aye.
Motion carries, 7 votes in favor, no opposed, no
Oh,
abstentions.
Jim, I'm gonna abstain on that one. I'm sorry.
Oh. 6 votes in favor, 1 abstention, no opposed, nobody's absent. The board is fully constituted. And the last item is the appeal pertaining to 930 Rock Beach Road. This is also a type 2 action for seeker purposes. Is there a motion that anyone would like to make, or I'll make one? All right, I'll move that we deny the appeal on this matter as well. Is there a second?
I will.
Okay. Discussion.
I'm not wild about it, but I'd like any ambiguity to be decided by the board when we're discussing a variance that's been applied for, rather than over an appeal towards something we haven't seen.
Well, and normally I would agree that it would be better to have a variance application and an appeal, but I mean the point for me was when I posed the question of whether, if it had a ceiling, would a variance be required? and it was conceded that it wouldn't. So it boils down to me with how they shape the interior of the property. It doesn't affect the mass. It doesn't affect how the how high the structure is from the outside perception. If you know, the alternative that wouldn't require a variance would be a flat roof or a flat ceiling. And it seems to me that flat roofs are not very common in this area. And this type of roof is consistent with the peaked roofs that just about every home in Arundecoit has. And when even the appellant's attorney conceded that if it wasn't a vaulted open area above that space, then it wouldn't require a variance. So it seems to me that the interpretation that was given to it by the town is an appropriate determination.
I concur, and I would strongly recommend to staff that this issue be reviewed and potential changes to the ordinance. To me, the difference between interior uses and building bulking should be different measurements. And, you know, it does leave a lot up to question the way it's worded right now, but.
I agree. And I think this is more out of dissatisfaction with the way that the ordinance is written than it is with anybody's interpretation of it or with anybody's enforcement of it.
Any other comments or discussion? All right. Ms. Bickett?
Aye.
Mr. Hart?
Aye.
I vote aye. Mr. Intini?
Aye.
Mr. Scott?
Aye.
Mr. Trevis?
Aye.
Mr. Upson?
Aye.
Motion carries, 7 votes in favor, no opposed, no abstentions. No one is absent. The board is fully constituted. And that concludes the last item on the agenda in terms of applications for this evening. There are 2 other matters that I'd like to address before we close the meeting. The first is to thank Dan Brennan for his service as our counsel for, I'm not sure exactly the amount of time, but it's a substantial amount of time. I appreciate his assistance to the board, and we wish him well in his future endeavors. And then with the packets of information, I'm looking for my copy. It's here somewhere. There it is. With the packets of the for the meeting tonight, everyone should have received copies of the minutes, the draft of the minutes for our meeting of Monday, March 2nd, 2020. And I would note that there are no minutes for April of 2020 because we had no meeting. Did everyone have a chance to review those minutes as drafted?
Yes.
And does anybody have any suggested changes or alterations to the minutes? Hearing none, I would move that the minutes as proposed for the meeting of March 2nd, 2020 be approved.
Second.
All right. Seconded by Mr. Trevis. Ms. Bickett?
Aye.
Mr. Hart?
Aye.
Oh, wait a minute. Yeah, you were. I vote aye. Mr. Intini?
Aye.
Mr. Scott?
Aye.
Mr. Trevis?
Aye.
And Mr. Upson?
Aye.
Motion carries, 7 votes in favor, no opposed, no abstentions. Nobody's absent. The board is fully constituted. Unless somebody has anything else that they'd like to bring before the board, I would adjourn the meeting. Seeing no objection, we are adjourned. Have a good evening and thanks for helping this all work out. It was an interesting experience. Hopefully, we won't have to repeat this for a long time. And with that,
Thank you.
I'll leave the meeting.
Thanks,
Then
Jim.
you can all
Awesome
talk
job.
about me later.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this
Thank you.
presentation of the
Good
Arundecoid
night.
Zoning Board on ICAT
Good night.
Government
Thank you.
Access.
Night, everybody.
Night.